All right, we are live. If it's Friday evening, if it's 6 p.m., it is time for All Politics Are Local. America's number one hip hop talking radio live coming right at you. I am Zaid Muhammad. I am going to walk you through this evening. We have a loaded evening. My founding co-host will be missing today, so I'm going to be stewarding most of the night with you. Our co-founding producer Jonathan Nelson will be on for a moment, uh, a little while later, but I have the task of directing the ship this evening, and it's an honor to be aboard. Our first segment will include two area scholars who are expert on urban uprisings. Yesterday marked the anniversary of the launch of the epic Newark Uprising, July 12th, 1967. And we're going to look at the impact of modern urban uprisings on our movement, on our community, on our times, with two experts, Professor Akil Khalfani, Africana Studies at Essex County College, and Professor Max Herman at New Jersey City University will join us momentarily for our 6 o'clock segment. At 6:30, Jonathan will be back for a few and will walk us through our monthly segment with Reverend and Professor Conrad Tillard. At 7 p.m., we will have two beloved comrades of mine who will give us some important perspective as we look back and appreciate the life and legacy of Dr. Mutulu Shakur. Dequi Sadiki, my comrade and long time, and was my chair for several years of the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee, will join us, as will one of my favorites, rad scholars, also Akinyele Umoja, right, who gave us that epic book, We Will Shoot Back, on the the Black Mississippi armed resistance tradition. We'll be looking at Dr. Mutulu Shakur. And then at 8 o'clock, we're going to have some guests from the mighty Newark Anti-Violence Coalition. You know, we lost a beloved daughter and sister last 2 weeks ago, Natasha Allen. NAVC's um, anniversary is next week, July 20th. And this year's anniversary will be a community-based dedication to Tasha, right? So we're going to have some folks from NAVC talk about that. And after that, as we wind down almost every Friday, the great DJ Rhino, Ride, will ride us into the end of the show with all things important, all things relevant, and all things historic this day and this week in hip hop. So we're ready for a good show. If any of our guests have arrived, we can we can begin to go in. If they haven't, I'll say a few things, just a minute to further set up the conversation in terms of some other local historic background. One of the things that we have to say right away about the impact, the seminal impact of the Newark uprising, is that Newark's uprising triggered. Um, oh, he's here, right? I think Akil, if you scroll down and hit Enter Studio, you should be okay, right? Triggered some 100 or more uprisings around the country, most of them right here in New Jersey, by the way, right? It was an important tipping point for the growth of the Black Panther Party, and we could go on for days. Today also marks the anniversary of the launch of the Plainfield Uprising. I'm originally from Plainfield, New Jersey. Plainfield, though not a large town, had an epic uprising in that our community had a rifle factory in our West End, and some folks from our underground. Uh, Sorry, we have to bring him. I'm also see if you can bring him in. Okay, there he is. There he is. There he is. There he is. All right. Welcome, Professor Khalfani. I was just making some background comments. We're getting some feedback from somewhere. Just getting some background on the Plainfield uprising because that's where I'm from. And Max is also in the room. we should be ready to go in just a moment. We'll bring Max in, and we'll. What the heck is that? I'm hearing something like. I don't have any other windows open. I don't think I do. All right, I think it's just stopped. I don't have any other windows open. I don't think I do. All right, I think it's just stopped. I'm getting a delay. Mic check. Y'all hear me okay? Delay. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what's going on. Mic check. Akil, how's your sound? Hear me okay?
You fine.
Maybe I don't know what's going on. We're having some tech issues. The most try and bring Max in, and as he does, I see what she's doing. She's taking y'all out, and I guess she's bringing y'all back in one at a time. As we address our tech issues, taking y'all out, and I guess she's bringing y'all back in one at a time. As we the most, if you probably have made me, and I don't have access to the controls. That's why I'm getting. I don't have access to the controls. That's why I'm getting this. Mic check. Mic check. All right, I think we're all right now. I think we're okay. Sorry about the tech stuff, y'all. And I'll take responsibility for that. Our guests are here. We were trying to bring them in, and we'll have our conversation, and we'll go to the next phase. Some of us need some more tech training. Max, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
I'm good. I can
there
hear
you go.
you.
You're good. You're good. All right, I'm better now. If we can get Akil in, we should be all right. We can round this out and get what we need from y'all and have a good quick talk. And I was just doing some background when we started having some tech issues. We're welcoming Professor Max Herman from New Jersey City University. Max is a well-established expert on uprisings. Recently quoted in an article around the January 6th uprising. Right, that's a whole nother conversation that should not be out of the purview of this conversation for sure. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to have it. Max, welcome to All Politics and Local. Is this your first time with us?
Yes, it is. It is.
Oh, okay. The show is some 14 years old. I have been with this show for good 2.5 years, and they've had some of everybody on the show. So I kind of thought you'd have been on already. Okay, and we're trying to get Akil to come back in and see how we work, but we're doing better. So Max, let's start the conversation with some of your thoughts. So let's see how Akil comes. See if we get him okay. Mike, check.
Right. Can you hear me?
Say it again.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yeah, we're good.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Very good. Both of you have your own expertise and purview around the question of uprisings, right? Akil, you particularly young man by the LA uprising in 1992, because you're from the West Coast. A lot of folks don't realize that because you've been out here with us for a minute now, right? But,
Yes.
and I remember. And that uprising was as important as any uprising that LA has done. My generation was by the Watch uprising in '65, right? Because the Panthers and a whole lot of movement that came out of it. '65 uprising. So we'll all talk about all of that. Next, I was going to open up with you because you always give us some good history when you're at the uprising anniversary. So why don't you share your thoughts about that uprising? You'll want to jump in behind.
Well, I shared some of my thoughts yesterday at the commemoration. It was my 20th year attending that event, and I wanted to give thanks to People's Organization for Progress and Larry Ham especially for organizing that. I began working on this topic back in the 1990s, And I came to Newark in 2000 as a assistant professor at Rutgers Newark, and I had written an article that was very quantitative, that was looking at where people had died, mapping out deaths and property damage, and looking at changes in demographics. And I was very unsatisfied with that. I thought it was a little bit cold, in the sense that it didn't give us a sense of a perception of meaning, what people were doing, why they were involved. So I began doing interviews in Newark in the summer of 2001. And I proceeded to do interviews in Detroit for the next 5, 6 years, ultimately culminating in my book, Summer of Rage, which was published in 2013. And well, I'm not sure where to begin if we want to talk about what led up to the events of 67, but Newark and Detroit were perhaps the largest, but not the first. These uprisings tend to come in bunches, so it really began in 64 with Harlem, and 1964 with Rochester, and it began to expand to other cities like Cleveland. And the Watts Rebellion of 1965 is perhaps the most famous. And those events, as I was saying yesterday, really ushered in affirmative action as a government policy. Lyndon Johnson in 1965, I think, as a result of the rebellions or uprisings, began to sense that something needed to be done. And he gave a speech at Howard University in which he famously talked about a metaphor of two runners lined up for a foot race, one who's just had his ball and chain shackles removed, and been told, on your mark, get set, go. And he basically said, he used the term affirmative action actually for the very first time, and he said that something needed to be done to ensure some degree of fairness. I think the other thing that was going on was Dr. King himself was also becoming, at least in the minds of some government officials, becoming a little bit more, quote, radical, more militant, was starting to shift away from just civil rights to economic rights. And he famously said, after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 64, he said a year later, what good is it to eat at an integrated lunch counter if you can't afford the price of a hamburger? So what I think some folks don't understand is why there was so much anger and resentment in cities like Newark and Detroit and throughout the United States and Black populations. But and for many white people that I interviewed, they were taken by surprise. They didn't see this coming. They thought everything was good, that relations between Black and white people were amicable. And then everything exploded and they were surprised. But most African Americans that I've spoken to were not surprised. People on the street knew something was going to happen. And the underlying factors, had been there for decades. Police brutality, unemployment, terrible structural conditions in housing, unaffordable housing, dilapidated housing. And of course, one of the main features was a lack of political power. So you didn't have much in the way of representation for the Black community. And this is a time when many cities like Newark and Detroit were becoming majority Black cities, and yet they did not have, they had one or two representatives. I think they had one representative in Newark, was Irvine Turner, who they named the boulevard after, but it was token representation. They didn't have political power. They didn't have economic power. Most of the businesses were owned by corporations like Public Service and Prudential, which they still are. So there were a lot of frustrations at that time. And I hate to say it, but many of those frustrations are still present today. And the conditions that were present in 1967 seem ripe for another round of uprisings or rebellions. The only difference could be that that the younger generation may not be as militant or steeped in ideology as they were back then. But I'll defer to Akil on that question.
There you go. All right. So yeah. So interestingly, I'm gonna I'll build on what Max was saying, but I want to start right where Brother Zaid started, and that is with the Los Angeles Rebellion. And when you think about these rebellions, these responses to oppressive conditions, that I was there right around the corner from where the spark happened, where Reginald Denny was pulled out of a semi truck. And that was a very tense time. You know, I even put out a fire in a brother who had a dry cleaners that was getting burnt down, and I put the fire in his dry cleaners. But you know, it was also not just with the police, but there was huge tensions there with the Korean community, and so then you had this tendency for all across the city to see signs that said black-owned business. And then there started being signs on non-black-owned businesses that said black-owned businesses because they didn't want their businesses to be burnt out. But there were shootouts between African Americans and Koreans. And then just in terms of the political agenda of it all, just like I believe in Newark, the idea of what Newark was, the idea of what Los Angeles was, expanded. So you would see in the suburbs, it was all of a sudden South Central Los Angeles every time it was on the media, on the news. But those who lived there knew that this wasn't the suburbs that was burning. This wasn't South Central. This is somewhere in the suburbs. But the media always had some spin that they wanted to put on everything, and we have to think about that. Even the idea of having this discussion today about the uprising in Newark and rebellions in general, well, we can't even start with LA or the stuff that happened in the 60s. You got to look way back to the Stono Rebellion. You got to look back to every single instance where African people were fighting for their liberation. The same thing when indigenous folks were fighting for their liberation. And then you got to look at when in cases where Africans and Europeans and others joined because it was an economic rebellion, right? So that we ignore the idea that people are responding to both racism, economic exploitation, and white supremacy. So these things go hand in hand, and that those rebellions happened because of those reasons, and that I was just I think yesterday, the day before, having a discussion about the police engagement. And so, you know, I've recently been added to the board for the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, and still we're working on the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, trying to get that activated. And so when you think about these kinds of issues, the response in part is because, that we live in a police state. We live in a militarized police state. And we have since the days of enslavement. And so if you go back and you find a documentary I watched yesterday, talks about the original badges that police officers had, but they weren't police badges. They were badges for slave catchers. And so when we think about that kind of sentiment and the engagement, and New Jersey just came out with a document yesterday, in the beginning of June, they talked about one of the biggest threats in New Jersey and in the United States is white supremacy. But we don't see the push to really kind of pull around and address that issue in the way that it was if the same language about the biggest threat. And this is the state of New Jersey doing this research. And so when you think about that, what is it that we're looking at, and how are we going to approach that differently?
Let's come back to a couple of things that you lifted up, because I think a lot of folks, let me stay on LA for a moment. A lot of folks may not understand the Black Korean tension that you mentioned, but I those of us who are around remember the horrible incident that led to a 15-year-old girl, Natasha Harlins, being shot in the head at a Korean grocer, and then the way the system treated that homicide was outrageous, and it was very much treated in a way that's parallel to how police are treated when they shoot us down in the street. So I wanted you to talk about that, because there is another thread of Asian Afro-American tension that is reemerging quietly as is kept around the question of affirmative action. So just a little more background on Natasha Harlins.
Can I jump in on this one, Mama, for a moment? Because I just watched a documentary called Liquor Store Dreams, and I encourage people to watch that. It is about Korean and black relations in LA. It's about people who own liquor stores, and it's about their families and their perspectives. And it's a very, very interesting documentary, and it does actually deal with the Latasha Harlins incident in a lot of detail. But I think it fosters a little bit of understanding from both sides.
Yeah, and I would say that when you think about the incident that happened with regard to Latasha Harlings and just that energy between African Americans and Koreans in Los Angeles. Well, sometimes it wasn't even just Koreans because people oftentimes don't understand the difference between Koreans and Chinese and Japanese, and so you have a huge Asian population in Los Angeles, and so then that sometimes that spilled over into maybe misidentification, but the point is that those tensions were very raw, and in the documentary on Rodney King, that it shows that where the shootouts were happening. I mean, literally in front of various stores where you had African American stores and Korean stores next door to each other. Literally, they were gun shootouts, and that's how high the tensions got. And there was a lot of Korean businesses that were burnt down because people felt the same way that people felt mistreated by the police. They felt violated, mistreated by Koreans, and some of it I think is cultural, but some of it is just some of the intentionality and disrespect. And so people wouldn't get change in their hands. Even today there's still the tensions that you're talking about are reemerging. Are sometimes, if you look at the usage of beauty supplies places, so that Koreans have kind of a market, a run on the market for beauty supply. And even when there's African Americans here in this city, in Newark, and it was a place in South Orange where African Americans had beauty supply places. They have a very difficult time getting product, and they don't get the pricing because the manufacturers or the distributors are oftentimes Korean-owned businesses, and so they get there's this tension even at the marketing place, the marketplace, but the business-to-business marketplace, and so then those tensions spill over into the streets, into the neighborhoods. And those are the things we need to think about and be cognizant of, and think about ways to ameliorate them so that we can avoid the type of carnage that happens. Because the sad part about the rebellion in Los Angeles was the same as here in Newark, and that is that almost all of the businesses and the places in the African American community are the things that got burnt down, right? So that, I mean, there was, the smoke was choking. I lived right in Inglewood, and Inglewood is right next to a part of, I was maybe 7 or 8 blocks away from the Reginald Denny incident. And then when you think about that tension, so then those municipal border lines are very close, and so it's not as cut and dry as it sometimes may seem. Oh, this was Inglewood. Oh, this was Compton. Oh, this was Los Angeles. This was so that those areas are much closer than we might think in terms of their proximity and in terms of how the communities relate to one another. And that's so that spillage that we see is part of where the lines for what was considered South Central was or was not, and where those majority Korean businesses are, many of them right in the African American community. And so then people feel isolated, they feel alienated, and they feel as though they can't get a foot in the door because there's a business block that's blocking them, and that community is intentionally impeding them from getting access to markets and things of that nature.
Well, I might take a little issue with that and broaden things historically.
Echo. Go ahead, Max.
Because you probably heard the term middleman minority, that if we're talking about Detroit in '67, we would be talking about Arabs who owned liquor stores and owned beauty supply stores. If we were talking about Newark in '67, we might be talking about Jews who own grocery stores and the like. So there's a structural position, and I'm not 100% certain that those groups were actively opposing or preventing Black folks from establishing their own businesses. I think on a much larger structural level, we're talking about banks and corporations that have oppressed Black people and have denied them the opportunity to get business loans and the like. I think the middleman minorities back then, the Jews, and then later the Arabs and the Koreans in LA, they become the flashpoint. They locate in poorer communities because that's where they can do business. That's where they can establish a business without a lot of capital. They do rely on extended ethnic network chains to get their supplies that understand that resentment. If you see the film on liquor store chains, you'll see you have two families. One family actually made a very concerted effort to reach out to the community and employ African Americans who live in the neighborhood. The other thing that makes this a little less cut and dry, especially with Los Angeles, which was the first case that I examined, the 1992 rebellion in LA, was there was a tremendous movement of Latinos, particularly Mexican and Central Americans, from East Los Angeles into, quote, South Central and Compton and Watts. And there was a lot of competition between Black folks and Latinos for control of territory. We're also talking about gangs, unfortunately, turf. And if you look back to previous rebellions like Chicago in 1919, you see similar dynamics. You see Irish people moving into Black neighborhoods and vice versa, and you see gangs competing with each other for turf. And so I think there's a much bigger picture here, and there are competing narratives. You know, there are narratives of, unfortunately, of victimhood, where Jewish folks will often take the narrative that the quote, the riots drove them out of Newark or drove them out of Detroit, which is simply not true, because many Jews had moved out of those cities already. But they did continue to have businesses in the city. And in all fairness, some of those merchants were unscrupulous, but others were actually, you know, part and parcel of the community, like Sam Brummer and his family that owned Hobby's Deli in downtown Newark. You know, you had good merchants and bad merchants, but in those particular communities, the typical face of somebody that owned a grocery store or a liquor store was a Jewish person. And some of them, you know, they did suffer losses, substantial losses, as a result of what happened during the rebellion. So sometimes the people that are at the brunt of the damage are not really the people that are causing the problem per se, because the problem is much bigger and much more structural.
I don't disagree that the problem is to a certain extent structural, but I would disagree that that the folks who you're talking about, whether it's Jews or Koreans or Arabs, that they don't have foot in the game of disenfranchising communities. I think that's disingenuous, because we see, especially, you know, when you're talking about Los Angeles, when you go to those communities, even today, you walk through certain communities, you go in there, you watch how people of African descent, regardless of how much money you have, are treated. Sometimes they're treated in a very different way than if a Jewish person came there, than if a Korean person came in there, than an Arab person came in there. And so when you think about those conditions, that they still exist today, and those tensions still exist today. So we have to have a holistic analysis and talk about, not that it's just the structural, but who maintains the structure, who engenders or who meets out the, because some of the people you're talking about are not poor people, they're wealthy people, and they didn't stay because there was no money to be made, they stayed because there was money to be made. And so then those are some of the tensions. And in Los Angeles, having grown up in Los Angeles, that there were tensions way before the LA rebellion, and that those things were sustained. So this was a spark, and that spark lit not only against the police but against the other folks who they felt, those communities felt, were disenfranchising them.
I
And
just think, Ron,
the largest number of folks, because there's also a misrepresentation of fact, the largest number of people who were incarcerated because of the LA Rebellion were Latinos and not African Americans. Some of the people who were arrested were Jewish people. Some of the people who were arrested were Asian people. Some of them were European people who were saying that somebody burnt their business down, but they burnt their own business down for insurance money. So if we're going to have holistic analysis, we got to have a across the board holistic analysis.
Well, let's not get away from one particular factor that we definitely have to talk about in the few minutes that we have left, and that is the question of police brutality. Where are we now? Where were we then? Right? Akil, you've just been asked recently to serve on the reconstitution of the Newark CCRB, the first in the state of New Jersey. One on its inception would have been one of the strongest in the country. But of course, we're fighting for that legislatively because we lost that authority in the court, right? Something that should have came out of the uprisings in the 60s, but were I'm going to use the word out of our lynching trauma that were castrated, quite frankly, by the power of police unions in urban politics. Let me get both of your thoughts on where we're at and where we should be going on the question of police brutality and police and civilian oversight of police authority.
well, I'm going to say things on a whole lot better than they were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I worked with a team of scholars from Rutgers Board on training the New Jersey State Police who are under a federal consent decree for disproportionately stopping people of color and frisking them and arresting them. And I worked with several colleagues, and we worked for 6 months. And the federal consent decree was lifted. And I just read in the paper the other day that the New Jersey State Police are now under investigation again for the very same practices that they were doing 20 years ago. You know, the idea of a civilian review board has been kicked around for a really, really long time. Bob Kervin, may he rest in peace, was pushing for that when he was the chairman of CORE back in Newark in the 1960s. That was one of the things he demanded during the rebellion, was that we have a civilian review board, and it never happened. And to his credit, Mayor Ross Baraka really pushed for it, and POP pushed for it, and the Anti-Violence Coalition pushed for it. But as you pointed out, the police, the Fraternal Order of Police, the police unions have been actively resisting that. So, and I warned, you know, when I testified years ago at City Hall in favor of that, of the CCRB, I warned that, you know, having studied rebellions and uprisings, that if this was one possible way of averting a larger conflagration, was to actually have civilian oversight of the police, and we don't have it yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, I participated in a session the other day that we were talking about police. There's a group of folks who call themselves, what do they call themselves? They call themselves abolitionists, and modern day abolitionists. And I understand the context of that. And what I said to them was that if you really want to change policing, if you really want to change the way things are happening, and I said the same thing when I was running for Congress, is that you've got to, we got to start with the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution and state constitutions, and how they authorize and legitimize what police forces are doing. And, you know, the level of militarization, if you look at the equipment, if you look at all the things that the police departments have now, in terms of tanks and armored vehicles, they're not just other kinds of things, but all of these things are part and parcel of what we have to look at. So I think we've got to get to a place where we're addressing these items on a much broader level, because the policing, and even though we want the CCRB, that's not going to be the end all, the be all. It's not going to change people's sentiment. It's not going to change their mindset about their disdain for certain groups of people. And so then there's a brother wrote a good book, and I'll leave with this, and that is it's called My Grandmother's Hands, understanding dealing with the trauma of white supremacy by Resma McConan, and it's a powerful book, and I think everybody should read that, because it talks about how to deal with police and policing, how policing should deal with themselves. The last thing I want to just leave you with is that the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General, on June 2023, they issued a report called Exposing White Supremacy in New Jersey, themes from community listening sessions and white supremacy and domestic threats. And that's the biggest threat. And so here we need to address that, but that's not really being addressed. But I'm glad that they did the study, and now we'll have to see what happens with it with regard to the Homeland Security, with regard to all the FBI and the state police. How are they going to respond to this?
At a rally we did at the State House several weeks ago, right? So so what will the real Attorney General please stand up on the question of what you're going to do to protect people's lives from this threat that's right in your face, that you documented yourself? As we wind up, let me ask you guys our ritual question, and that's this. This is quiet as kept. This is a hip hop talk show, so we ask every guest that joins us, whether this is their first time or not, who their favorite hip hop artist or group is, or who are they listening to now to get them through what it is they're doing in their respective work in March. And Akil, you probably the youngest out of the two of you. I'm gonna go with you first because you're closer to the genre.
So I would just say that we got to go with Public Enemy. We're talking about violence and police. All the Public Enemy songs from the 80s, the 90s. That came out with Spike Lee's movie. That whole album is the cornerstone of it.
Straight ahead, Max. How you roll?
Well, I'm going to go real old school on this and say Curtis Blow, and Curtis is going to be, I think it's Sounds of the City outside of NJ Pack in a few weeks from now. And I think the message is still the message. It is still like a jungle out there, and people are struggling to get by, and they're dealing with serious economic problems and police brutality and the like. So again, it's funny how history, or maybe not funny how history it seems cyclical, but there are some things that he was talking about in the early days of hip hop that are, they're coming back and they're still relevant today.
I want to definitely have both of you back. We've got a lot more to talk about, particularly where do we go from here on the question of police accountability, right? And trying to address this need for a transformation of so-called police culture. There's some definite places to go. And what are some of the things that we've done here also that in the reducing of police that we've actually done better on the question of violent crime here in Newark and some other cities? We'll come back to that. I'm glad you guys were on, and look forward to having you back, and appreciate you sharing some time with us on this Friday.
Thank you very much. Look forward to it.
Good to see you, Akil.
All right, same here, Max. Hey, Jonathan, peace.
Hey, how are you?
Excellent.
Good seeing you.
All right, yep. You guys take care. Take care, Baba Zaid.
Right on, y'all.
Hey, man, how are you? We are getting ready to head to this next section where we talk to the legendary, the prolific activist, Reverend Conrad B. Tillard. He has his own show on Sirius XM. He has been a force in the community since the 90s. People know him as the hip hop minister, known him as a minister I know him now as Reverend Conrad B. Tillard. Hey, man, how are you?
I am great. How you doing, my brother?
I'm really good.
Right?
I'm really
Can
good.
you hear me and see me good?
I see you. I see you well. I hear you well.
Wonderful. And I see Brother Baba, and I see that wonderful smile on his face. So I look forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. So, man, you said that when you came on, we were like, hey, what's going to be the topic this week? You know, we always have lively topics. You said affirmative action, and I was like, great. Now, what is your? I know I have my strong opinions. We had this last week, but what's your take?
I think we would agree probably on this topic. You know, the fact of the matter is the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. And they have ruled, of course, now something that I think is entirely unreasonable, that race can't even be a factor in college admissions. To me, that's very problematic on a number of levels. First of all, college admissions is not an exact science. I've always had and would have taken issue with white males or any group that is denied a seat in a class because they feel like someone else who is less qualified than is accepted. First of all, college admissions in no school system that I know of, other than the New York City specialized high schools, depend on one criteria. This is the problem, in my view, with Stuyvesant, Brooklyn Tech, Bronx Science. It's just one simple criteria that allows you admissions into that school, and that's
the test that they have.
That's one test,
a particular test.
But most civilized college admissions or admissions period, even especially at the higher rung, it's almost like inviting people to a dinner party. You're looking for diversity. You're looking for people from different parts of the country. For example, Columbia University could take all of their applicants from New York and New Jersey and fill their class.
Right.
But they don't want a school with people from just New York and New Jersey. That would be St. John's.
And they call that geographic diversity.
It's geographic diversity. That would be St. John's, or that would be St. Francis, Brooklyn. And national schools that have an international reputation obviously want a very diverse population. They want regional diversity. They want international. They prize international students. They want gender diversity. So to me, it's an absurd notion that anyone could even go into court and say, I was denied a spot because someone else was admitted. I had better test scores with it. Maybe you did, but maybe you didn't have a more interesting narrative. Maybe you didn't play 3 instruments like I do. Maybe you didn't grow up in poverty like I did and overcome poverty. So it's an inexact science. You know, a lot of these schools declare all the time, they don't even use letter grades. So I don't even know how that had standing in the Supreme Court, but obviously it has. It's been a preoccupation of this court, and particularly Clarence Thomas. And this is one of the areas, and I don't share the view of him that a lot do. I mean, I am proud of every Black person that achieves something, but I strongly disagree with this ruling. It is. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. There's no way in creation that I could have gotten into the University of Pennsylvania if race was not considered. But within 6 months of me being there, I was a leader, honors student, and was by the time I left, I was inducted into one of the most prestigious and oldest honor societies at the school, Spinks, with John Legend and Jeffrey Goldberg and some other folks who are in that as well. So it's a bad ruling in my judgment. You know, last thing I want to say about that is, you know, there are a lot of immigrants, particularly in the Asian community. They've done very well in recent years. And this is part of the problem with some of the specialized high schools. You have a class full of people who have focused on an exam. You know, they have not engaged in extracurricular activity. and I'm not being overstating, but they score high in an exam, and yet they don't bring these other important diversities to the class. How does that ultimately educate people? So I strongly disagree with this ruling. But I will say this, because it is the law of the land, and until another case comes, and that may be on legacy admissions, it may be on gender diversity. I mean, if you're not for affirmative action, then how is it possible for you to say that a class has to be 50% women because women are 50% of the population? It's a bad ruling, and until it's challenged, it is the law of the land. But the good news is the students that can't get into Seton Hall now, many of them will go to Lincoln. The students that can't get into Seton Hall and Columbia, they will now go to Howard. And then those who can't get into Howard now will go to Morgan State and Lincoln and Morris Brown, and this will revitalize Black colleges. That's the positive side of this very bad ruling, in my judgment.
All right, so you said a lot, right? Like in terms of that, I want to bring it back to what you talked about with New York City schools, right? Because the danger of this particular ruling isn't that it's limited to colleges. It is that we can't talk about race in public life for issues of remedy, right? So if you have your city that has a history of not giving contracts to Black and brown people, right? Then all white contracts, cool, as long as you don't say all white contracts, right? So any de facto racism that exists in contracting, that exists in the schools that you're talking about, right? Like when you look at it, if anything is based on one test, and we know that that many tests are economically biased, right?
Absolutely.
Like a lot of them are geared toward that. We know that these they're not exact sciences. They perpetrate as being that. But I remember back in high school, we were debating this kid, and everyone was talking about this is a kid who got a perfect 1600 on his SATs. And so I was debating this kid next. And I was like, cool, I wonder if he's really smart. Oh, well. And it wasn't a particularly difficult round, right? Like it was like one of those rounds where you just smack somebody really hard. Right. And so got rolled, right? And so one of those things is like, 1600 on the SAT, perfect score. But does that mean you think? Does that mean you can think your way out of a box? Does that mean that you have what it takes to be able to compete? What type of knowledge is it actually testing, right? What I find is that 30% of grades are political, and a lot of what we do in our school system is we test kids in order to be obedient, right? We're the most obedient children. And, part of being obedient is part of success in schools. Part of tests also test class. They test obedience. They test like a lot of these things don't test intellect. They don't test like what you can do intellectually against somebody else, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and think about this in terms of the standardized tests, which actually, ironically, a lot of schools are realizing are not an accurate depiction of how well you do. They're not even using them anymore. There's a moratorium on these tests at more and more schools. But when I was in school, I went to a public high school in Washington, D.C., and my guidance counselor told me that I would never get into any of the schools that I applied to, nor would I even be able to do the work. But think about it. They had the test prep programs in that era, in the 80s. I just didn't know about them. I just didn't take
He actually said that to you. I want that to marinate on folks, because I had a similar experience.
Well, these are Black teachers. This was a Black woman. So
okay, well, mine was white, but okay.
Because I had all Black teachers, okay? Yeah, so that happens in our own community as well.
Absolutely, and that's documented, right? Like especially toward Black males.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely. I think no matter how you may desire to, Jonathan, there's no disagreement with us on this issue. I think.
But there's one disagreement. There's one disagreement we have.
Okay, what's the one?
All right, man. You call Clarence Thomas black. I'm like,
yeah, he is.
You know,
yeah.
we can argue about that. What is black really?
Well, first of all, Clarence Thomas is as black as you. He's black as me. And there's no monolithic black person.
Yeah, I know, but
the person, and my point is, he's a black man, and he's a man that grew up in poverty.
He did.
And discrimination in Georgia.
And got
he benefited from affirmative action.
He did.
Absolutely right. Holy Cross at that time was looking for black students. That gave him the opportunity, the seminary that he went to in Georgia. So here's my point. While I disagree with this man, I disagree with a lot of black men. I disagree with Michael Eric Dyson. I disagree with some black man walking around in a dress. But I cannot invalidate someone's blackness because I don't agree with them. And I don't like the way we do that with black people who are conservative. You don't do that with black men walking around with a dress on. You don't say he's not a black man.
Not at all.
We cannot do that.
However,
we have difference of opinion.
The only difference I would say,
and that's what it is.
The only difference that I would say between black conservatives I respect and like Clarence Thomas is that reading that decision, it's like, who hurt you, man? Like at a certain point.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
It was like
you broke up just a bit.
I said that when reading Clarence Thomas's decision, I just was like, Clarence, who hurt you? What black person hurt you, man? Like there was so much packed. In order to understand this decision, you have to go to psychoanalysis. If it was like a straight up decision that was from a black conservative, but like at the point where you're like, history is not important. Context is not important.
Well, I understand.
The 14th Amendment
wasn't
made for what it was made for.
I do understand the logic. Let me just say this. Not that I agree with it, but I think it's very important as we analyze things so there is a coherent logic in the decision in terms of, at least it's a consistent logic that he has expressed. You're correct in saying after he benefited from affirmative action, I don't know if his logic changed. There are some that say that because he couldn't get a job coming out of Yale Law School, he was irreparably damaged, believing that the degree he had meant nothing. I don't know. That's all. That's not.
And it was Ronald Reagan's Justice Department that hired him. Oh, we're out. So he'll come back in a minute. But it was, Baba Zaid. It was, Ronald Reagan's Justice Department that hired him. And when he worked for someone like it, there are certain times where people, it seems like they're actively working against black people for the to be lauded by white people.
And to me, that's an oversimplification. That's an oversimplification. Clarence Thomas, if you know his history, he was a very poor black. He was very poorly treated by middle-class blacks throughout his life. Now, I'm not justifying this. I'm not saying that this is right, but we know what colorism is in the black community. His nickname growing up in Georgia in the community was ABC, America's Blackest Child. So this was his nickname. He was very, very poor, and he was.
Your question, Jonathan.
Right. Who hurt you? That answers the question of who hurt you.
So that's part of it. Then the other thing, of course, and there is, I have 5 children, and only one of my children have gone to religious schools, parochial schools, and public schools for the most part, and maybe a charter, 1 or 2. Spent some time there, but I never sent a child to an independent school. But our last child, we decided, would go to an independent school. And he's been in private school from 3 years old, all the way from first a black Montessori school in Bedford-Stuyvesant, then an independent school in Manhattan. And, I say to him, son, and he's on his way to a boarding school for high school. And I said, son, you got all the affirmative action points when you were a 4-year-old boy coming from Bedford-Stuyvesant, applying to that school in Manhattan. You got all your affirmative action points then. You got them when you applied to that boarding school in Delaware, coming from Bedford-Stuyvesant. When you graduate, you won't have the narrative that I had.
Right.
That I went to underfunded schools and schools in an urban community, and I have great potential, and given an opportunity like this, I'll be able to manifest it. I said, you won't have that narrative. You will be judged on the fact that you've gone to some of the best schools in America all your life. You've never stepped foot inside of it. And so part of the logic that Clarence Thomas and Black conservatives have used, and I don't agree with it, all in total, is that they said there are too many people who are middle class, who are affluent, who are advantaged. They point to people like Jesse Jackson's children, and the civil rights leaders' children that go to schools like St. Albans, Sidwell Friends. It's saying, what do they need affirmative action for when they've gone to the best schools in America? And just because they're Black, they are accepted into schools when they don't measure up academically, when there are other people who may be immigrants, who may be poor whites, who have not gone to these schools, that are disadvantaged. Now, there's a historical argument to make about Black people uniquely have a history because we were in slavery and systematically denied access. So I understand the logic, but the logic is not absurd. It's not silly. It makes sense, whether you agree with it or not.
Well, I think that was the most generous part of their logic. Yeah. But it kind of gets underturned when they were like, military academies can use race because we need Black people to die, right? Like, well,
I agree. I agree. Right?
So, but on the other side of it, though, mm-hmm. I think that particular argument has been what people like me, people who work in public schools, people who work with younger Black children, or African American children, have actually been arguing about the deficits of affirmative action, right?
Okay.
As in why the limits of affirmative action,
right?
Because it is true that, you know, that the kids who benefited from affirmative action, who went to Ivy League schools, that those kids are doing well because they, or at least have the opportunity to do well because they are being given a lot of opportunities. But that does not mean at all, right, that we are dealing with like the descendant of the African American slave trade, right? The kids who are still in these places. And one of the criticisms of affirmative action by people who work with young Black children from urban areas is that at the elite schools, they're not getting in significant numbers anyway right now, right?
Right. Absolutely.
As in the pressure on a lot of these, admissions offices was, you need to make sure that you are literally, one, dealing with people who are descendants of the American slave trade, two, people who are in public schools, like are all the Black people you're getting from Exeter and Andover, right? Like, is that your class of people? And that's been true for like 10, 15 years, maybe even longer, in terms of those conversations of where are you targeting?
Right.
And to some extent, I think that the decision, if people really want to do what affirmative action was supposed to do, because the definition of what it means to be Black in 1965, 1969, 1970 is different than it is right now. As a public school teacher, you see this, right? As in, there's an entire group of Black immigrants who are Black in larger numbers than before. They're not necessarily descendants of the American slave trade.
Of the American slave trade.
Right. They're not necessarily descendants of the American slave trade.
Absolutely right.
So I think that there's an opportunity to have a conversation that is very much the reparations conversation. That is very much like looking at this as in, they said you can't use race, but legacies are okay. And I've been like, legacies of the African American legacies of the American slave trade. That's a thing. Yeah. It's not a racial category, even though it's just legacies aren't a racial category. They're just majority white.
Right.
legacies of the African American.
Right, and that right.
It's not a racial category. It just happens that, you know,
and that's my issue. How is it okay to have legacy admissions or gender admissions? I mean, in other words, if race can't be used as a factor, which to me is an absurdity, that it can't even be considered as a factor. Not it should never
White women have benefited from affirmative action more than any other group.
Well, white women, black women, and in other words, the point is, if you're going to say that race can't be a factor, how can you come behind then and say legacy is a factor or gender? And so that makes the issue problematic, because if your argument is you can only consider the qualifications of a person, your sex is not a qualification.
So their justification was the 14th Amendment, and they were literally saying that remedies for race are discrimination. So it opens up all other remedies, just not basically 13th and 14th Amendment were made specifically to help Black people, formerly enslaved Black people. Absolutely. And they are literally taking it out of its context, and we're like,
it's fallacious logic.
Black person,
right? It's fallacious logic. It is a most absurd and even obscene fallacious logic to try and say, well, Dr. King fought for a colorblind society. But I will say that you know, I'm not a doom and gloom person. There's always some good news. First of all, there are ways, and many of these institutions understand the commitment to, as I tell my son throughout his experience in private school, and I served on the board of the school, and I used to tell the good white folks every meeting, diversity works two ways. I know you are enhanced. Son's presence in this school, we bring something to the table. We are getting something, yes, but we bring something. And to act as though race is not important. Again, it's such a, it's not that it's a devastating blow, because you knew it was coming.
Right.
But I will say this, it's not the end, because there will be challenges to this case. There will be other cases that will raise other issues. But I think as Black people, we did drop the ball in the sense that we continue to allow the children of affluent and middle-class people to take advantage of some of these opportunities. And we did not get enough of the poor and disenfranchised involved. And they have to carry some responsibility for that too, because everybody has responsibility. There are plenty of poor people who got their children in the best schools, people who were highly motivated, people who wanted a great future for their children, understood education was a part of that. There are plenty of people. I met people in school out of Newark, New Jersey, that had gone to some of the worst public schools and some of the better public schools, but they came from poverty and they worked their way up just as other folks did. And so, nobody gets a free lunch here. Nobody, I don't believe that any group is that disadvantaged that you don't hold them responsible to some extent for their condition. We all have to have skin in the game.
Yeah. Well, again, this has been another very cool week. I'm glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that we did not disagree much.
No, not much.
We did not disagree much, and I think that when it came to some of the shortcomings of affirmative action, even I think we agree in that the specifications actually become really important, as in what dealing with descendants of the American slave trade, dealing with poor Black people, right? Dealing with people from urban areas, right?
Absolutely.
Like I think that sometimes even understanding that the definition of what it means to be Black or Latino or Asian has changed over the last 25 years. I think that those things really I think everybody of good faith will have the ability to have some remedy or change that is positive, even though we know that a lot of this isn't because there was good faith. A lot of it is because Obama was president and Black people had too much in terms of perception. And there is a level of white backlash that was predictable. That this is all a part of
I don't agree with that, because this affirmative action conversation has been going on since Baki.
No, we know, but in terms of it being effective, as in like...
Well, here's where I blame us, is that this knucklehead political strategy that we continue to have, where you just pile up 99% of the Black people in one party, instead of us being also in the Republican Party for the last 50 years. We should have been advocating within that party that that's bad public policy.
Let me
just finish this point. If we were more present you knew the Republican Party has been talking about getting rid of race in admissions. You know, they've been talking about reverse racism. They've been talking about, but we're not in the party. And if we had been in that party, at least in adequate numbers, 30, 40%, 30% of our people fighting within that party, so that would not become an article of faith of that party, and that conservative court would not have enacted what they've been talking about for 50 years in lieu of our president. What
you're saying is that there was no debate, is unquestioned. Even the Black conservatives who are in the Republican Party now, like the senator from South Carolina, is very much applauding the decision, right? Because there's no real questioning or debate that comes.
Because there's an infinitesimal number of Blacks in the party, and most of the Blacks in the party go along with the party line. And some bad dudes like Baba Zaid need to register as a Republican and be there and fight for.
I think you need to register as a Republican because you have more of a stomach for it than anybody else. Right?
I actually don't have
child of the Black Panther Party.
Say that again. What'd you say? Well, Eazy-E went with his leather jacket and dripping Jerry curl back in 1988.
He did
to a Republican fundraiser, and that's what you got to have. You got to have some bad niggas that show up in that party and say, this is what we want to see. We're here. This is our party. We're in it, but we are not the normal Black in the party. We are. That's what we did in the Democratic Party. That's what Fannie Lou Hamer did. So that's partly our fault also, because we just weren't present for the conversations.
And it really is who jumps first, right?
Yeah.
But we
right.
are
First man on the hill gets shot.
Right. Who wants to do that, man? You don't want to do it. You're pushing.
I ain't afraid to take the point. That's what I do.
So it's good having this conversation this week.
Absolutely.
We'll see you. We'll see you soon, man.
I thank you so much, and God bless both of you, my friends, my brothers, and always good to be on this great show.
Always good to have you, man.
All right, my friend. Take care.
Take care. Hey, Baba. So this is where I jump off this section too. I am in Atlanta visiting Mom. And Mom, say hi.
Hi.
Hey, so
good to hear from you, man. Your boy doing pretty good. Your boy and your girls doing pretty good. We're proud of them.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. Much appreciated. But you have an exciting segment coming up, and a very informative one.
My crew, we ride through Clarence Thomas is the hell out of town.
Right. And with a real American hero that you are celebrating. So I appreciate what you're doing, because this segment, important segment as well. So I will talk to you.
It's a heavy one because it's a heavy loss. We're gonna deal with it.
Yep, exactly. And a heavy loss, and also a heavy tribute too.
That's right. Heavy legacy that we're gonna hold up to the fullest.
Right.
And Clarence Thomas says your asses need to beware because we're coming for you.
All right, take care, man.
All right.
And shout out to
that we are talking about is none other.
One last thing. One shout out to Masoma. Thank you for being in the background.
We do appreciate you.
He is a recent high school graduate who's helping us behind the scenes. Big shout out to you. Can't wait to have your first interview and start interviewing people on here.
Nice.
Right. Take care.
So this segment is, and greetings to both of you. For folks who are just joining us, we are just being joined by two comrades of mine that I'm extremely proud of, that I ride with to the fullest. We're getting ready to talk about the legacy of Dr. Mutulu Shakur. There's a lot in the air recently about his stepson, Tupac Shakur, the Dear Mama special, and all of that. But in the midst of that, just this last week, we lost Dr. Mutulu, and he was indeed a doctor. And there's so many places to go with this. This will just be the beginning of a conversation on how we appreciate him and why we hope hip hop grows up politically at this particular pivotal introspective time that it's in its 50th anniversary. Dequi Kioni Sadiki is the former chair of the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee. We've been riding together for a long time on a lot of different fronts. We actually, came into this work in terms of the question of political prisoners, both around the time when Mutulu was going in, right? And we were sharing this on another conversation that we had just recently. She's a driving force with the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition. We're still doing this work in whatever formations that we're in. Akil, both, and has been here before. So I want to say welcome back, Dequi. My brother Akinyele Umoja, Malcolm X grassroots movement, and the author of that powerful insurgent scholarship, We Will Shoot Back.
Absolutely.
That's the title. The title comes from someplace because we will shoot back. Ain't nobody going backwards without no goddamn fight. And they ain't never been like that, right? Right. Clarence Thomas is notwithstanding. We will shoot back. Right.
Free land.
So Akinyele, it's good to have you. But I want to also really just mention a moment that in these recent pushes around trying to get Mutulu out, because there were two pushes. He had done his time, right? And we were also pushing for the medically compassionate release because he had contracted that painful bone cancer that was, ultimately going to claim his life, and we were not going to accept losing him in the clutches of the state. And I want to shout out a lot of the young people, younger than us, that were in the Malcolm X grassroots movement that jumped in at that particular time and helped us move the needle and ultimately get him out of the clutches of the state. So we lost him with his family. We had actually made some inroads and had some messages in some places in the community. Dequi, when you and I were together last in Philly doing a fundraiser for Mutulu, I said, I hope I get to meet him, but we knew we were up against the clock. And I'm glad some of y'all have, and you have that history. And let's talk about it. Let's just dive in. And Akinyele, you got the longest history with Mutulu. Why don't we start with you, and just talk about just who this great warrior and freedom fighter and brother that we love just left out here to the land of the ancestors.
Man, first of all, in the name of the Creator and the mother, fathers, and all our ancestors, I'd like to greet both of you and two people I have tremendous amount of respect for, because you all do the work, and y'all do the work following the footsteps of two people I love, Baba Herman Ferguson and Mama Ialua Ferguson. So I was introduced to both of you through their work, and so and so we'll start with that. Mutulu Shakur, when he starts his own history, he talked about being a child of a blind mother. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1950. Single parent, blind mother, and he had to be the advocate growing up as a shorty for the household, for him, his mom, and his sister. He really is. He says he had three fathers who kind of guide him in his path to being a revolutionary and being a new African. New African, for those don't know, is just Black folks who believe in self-determination, believe that we should be sovereign and have our own nation. But one was a Baba by the name of Saladin Shakur, who was an associate of Malcolm X. He had two sons who were founders of the Black Panther Party in New York, Zayd Malik Shakur and Lumumba Shakur.
Say we lost here in Jersey on the Turnpike.
Yes, sir.
Forgotten man of the attack on them on the Turnpike back in '72. Just so folks understand
that. 73, I think. 73, because I remember I was
73. You're right.
I got the word, man. Then we got his second father. He said was his. Well, he said Saladin Shakur was his spiritual father. Then Herman Ferguson, who we mentioned before, who was an associate again of Malcolm, was would be a founder of the Revolutionary Action Movement in New York, as well as the Republic of New Africa, provisional governor of the Republic of New Africa. And then his final father was his street father, Sonny Carson. Sonny Carson, who was a led street organization in Brooklyn. Street organization is what I call gangs. I want to give it a more honorable name than what our enemies call it. And under Sonny, they worked to try to bring together the street tribes in New York City. So all of these men influenced Baba Mutulu's legacy. He joined the movement when he was 16 in Queens, New York, growing up in Queens. He becomes active under the direction of Baba Herman Ferguson and the Revolutionary Action Movement. At 18 or really 17, he becomes a signer to the Declaration of Independence of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa at his founding conference in Detroit, Michigan in 1968. When Herman Ferguson ran for Senate under the Freedom and Peace Party in 1968, one of the things they did was campaign throughout the state, and Mutulu was a part of that campaign. And one of the things Herman advocated was reparations and sovereignty and self-determination for Black people as a senatorial candidate. And they got thousands of votes.
I'm trying to find some of those posters from those campaigns.
I have a copy of the button for the campaign. And if you got the poster, please share it with me so I can put it in my PowerPoint I've been using. And then the next year, of course, I just saw the documentary The Sun Rises in the East, and it talks about the whole struggle around Ocean Hill, Brownsville, for our people to get community control of the schools. And Mutulu became very active as a teenager, along with his comrade who was in the Black Panther Party, Abdul Majid. And when the white teachers went on strike, then Mutulu and others, under the leadership of Sonny Carson, Herman Ferguson, and other grassroots leaders in Brooklyn, Abdul and Mutulu went and took over the classes and continued to teach the youth our history and our struggle and things of that nature.
Amazing stories. Right.
Yeah. And so, and one final one in his youth, I could say more, and we could go on all day. But as you know, he takes people from Ocean Brownsville with Baba Herman and Mama Ialua to the second convention of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. And then as the vice president, Milton Henry, also known as Gaidi Obadele, and Queen Mother Moore were leaving, they were attacked by the Detroit police, and the security responded. And in the gun battle, one of the police officers ended up being killed. And as Pac used to say, the police are the biggest gang on the street. So when one of theirs went down, they came back in revenge and shot up the church, which was the New Bethel Church in Detroit, which is the church of Aretha Franklin's father, C.L. Franklin. And the New African security defended the facility. But one of the stories we have is Baba Mutulu, who's again a teenager, put Ialua Ferguson on the ground as bullets are flying, and he puts his body over hers. Most of the New Africans, over 100 people, were arrested, and a Black judge set up court in the police station that night, and the hundreds of people were released in that particular situation. But again, it shows the loyalty of Mutulu Shakur for our people. He has a life of resistance. a life of resistance. And, you know, I had a lot of contact with him. I met him when I was 18, but I had contact with him as a professor. I went into a couple of the penitentiaries that he was incarcerated in, and we taught, you know, classes on our culture, our history, things of that nature. I was able to bring in Marimba Ani and people like Asa Hilliard, Baba Hannibal Afri. People like that came in to speak to the men in the prison. But everywhere, and this is a legacy of the work he did with Sonny Carson, there was unity in all of those prisons. You know, Mutulu was able to unite, you know, from Sunni Muslims to Nation of Islam to Rastafarians to the Gangster Disciples, the Crips. Everybody would get down in unity, and violence decreased at all of the prisons where he was incarcerated. Particularly if he had access to people, one of the things they would do was to isolate him. And one of the things about the isolation is it did have negative impact on his health. But let me be quiet because I also want to hear from my sister Ialua.
You called me Yalua.
I'm sorry. To Ialua's
that's okay, brother.
That's right.
You to be
spiritual daughter.
That's right. That's right.
As I'm clearing that up, let me say
spiritual daughter. You know, and that's one of the reasons my mind got confused, because I know you've been a loyal political daughter to Ialua, and I want to acknowledge you for that loyalty and care that you've given our elder, our mother,
thank you,
our queen mother.
Yeah,
and we're trying to revive our freedom fighter dinner this year, and we are going to rename it after Mama Ialua.
Ah, beautiful. I never made it, so give me an advance note.
Now, one of our comments took our date. We were going to do it in Black August. We got to push it back now. We're looking at November now.
Okay.
But we're definitely going to revive it. We're going to rename it after Mama Ialua. I don't know what it would take to get her up here, but if we get over here or virtually or something, we got to give her props while she's still with us. I didn't realize that her birthday had just passed.
29th of June.
91.
It's 91.
I don't know. The odds are against me coming anywhere close to that. But, you know, Herman had
Hey, one never knows.
Right? Yeah, we need to train.
A lot of those BLA
at this age now, just in case.
Well, I thought Baba Herman was waiting till the armed struggle jumped off. That's why
that's right.
So in fact, it was right after Ferguson.
He would have been giving orders. That's right.
Right. I thought that was a cue that Ferguson with the same last name.
Yeah, how about that? Well, I'm so thankful. One, Zaid, thanks for inviting us here. And when you mentioned Yalua and Herman Ferguson, it is with such revolutionary love and honor and respect. And when you say about being Yalua's spiritual daughter, I'll always remember when Herman found out that I was marrying Sekou, he had a conversation with me. He's like, "You are my daughter, so I want to know that he's going to be doing the right thing by you, and I'm going to have a conversation with him to make sure that he's doing right by you, because you belong to us."
That's how a real Baba rolls.
That's old school. That is right. I agree.
That's right. That's right.
Everybody can't talk to Sekou like that.
No doubt.
But Herman could, right?
Yeah, he could.
Abba, right? There are people that can keep it real and keep it straight ahead and just say it like it is, right? So, but before I talk about Mutulu, I want to share a poem from Masada's autobiography, right? Because we their tradition, right? Because Akinyele spoke to that, you right? Mutulu stands in the tradition.
That's right.
Like Herman and Yalua, Ferguson stand in the tradition.
Right.
Like Abba Shakur, Saladin Shakur stands in the tradition. Like all of our political prisoners, right? There are people who stand in the tradition. They don't stand by themselves. They stand with people in front of, behind, to the side, right alongside them. So I think about this poem that Asada wrote called The Tradition, and I think about those who are among the living and those who are among the ancestral realm. So the poem is called The Tradition. Carry it on now. Carry it on. Carrying it on now. Carry it on. Carry on the tradition. There were Black people since the childhood of time who carried it on. In Ghana and Mali and Timbuktu, we carried it on. Carried on the tradition. We hid in the bush when the slave masters came holding spears. And when the moment was right, we leaped out and lanced the lifeblood of our would-be masters. We carried it on slave ships, hurling ourselves into oceans, slitting the throats of our captors. We took their whips and their ships. Blood flowed in the Atlantic, and it wasn't all ours. We carried it on. Fed Missy arsenic apple pie, stole the axes from the shed, went and chopped off master's head. We ran, we fought, we organized the railroad and underground. We carried it on. In newspapers and meetings and arguments and street fights, we carried it on. In tales told to children, in chants and cantatas, in poems and blues songs and saxophone screams, we carried it on. In classrooms, in churches, in courtrooms, in prisons, we carried it on. On soapboxes and picket lines, welfare lines, unemployment lines, our lives on the line. We carried it on. In sit-ins and pray-ins and march-ins and die-ins, we carried it on. On cold Missouri midnights, pitting shotguns against lynch mobs, on burning Brooklyn streets, pitting rocks against rifles, we carried it on. Against water hoses and bulldogs, against nightsticks and bullets, against tanks and tear gas, needles and nooses, bombs and birth control, we carried it on. In Selma and San Juan, Mozambique, Mississippi, in Brazil and in Boston, we carried it on. Through the lies and the sellouts, the mistakes and the madness, through pain and hunger and frustration, we carried it on. Carried on the tradition, carried a strong tradition, carried a proud tradition, carried a Black tradition, carry it on, pass it down to the children, pass it down, carry it on now, carry it on to freedom.
That's right.
So when I think about Mutulu and Akinyele raised so many names, Abdul Majid, Albert Noah Washington, Kwesi Balagoon, right? Jaheed, right? Yes. Robert Seth Hayes, right? When we think of Bashir Hamid, these are the people that carried it on. Mutulu Shakur, right? These are the people that carry it on. So when we speak about them, we are speaking about the Black freedom struggle and those people who participated. And it's so important that we speak their names and speak about their deeds and their commitment, and that we carry it on to tradition, because we didn't invent struggle, and it's our job and our responsibility to participate in struggle in the time that we have, however many, back in those times, Black Panther Party members was 16 years old, 15 years old. Pam Hanna was 15 when she joined the party. So was Jamal Joseph as well. Mutulu gets involved, right? People were teenagers, but they felt that once they became politicized, they understood that the enemy was colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy, right? Imperialism. It wasn't just police terror and murder, because that was just a simple manifestation of the real enemy of capitalism and colonialism and colonization. And so the beauty of Mutulu is understanding that, with him being a doctor of medicine, a doctor of the healing modality of acupuncture. You think about how in New York City, you can pass by all these methadone clinics. Like the pharmaceutical companies in the time since they criminalized Mutulu and the Lincoln detox and closed it, you think about how many billions of dollars they have made off of getting people addicted to methadone versus heroin. when what Mutulu and the Lincoln Detox was doing was getting people off of heroin and saying, no, you don't need that. We have a way to get you off of that and to live your life with the fullness that your life deserves.
Take a step back, Dequi and Akinyele. Take a step back and let's tell a story how he became an acupuncturist, because that I think a lot of folks don't appreciate that about his legacy.
Well, what do you mean how he came? I mean,
Akinyele laid out how young Mutulu was when he came in the struggle and whatnot, right? And he contributed on so many levels, right? But he was a part of that of a trip of folks who went to China, right, and a solidarity trip, and saw acupuncture work. I guess I'm doing it now.
Actually, it goes before that. It goes before that because you had the takeover by the Young Lords and other forces in the Bronx of Lincoln Hospital, and they called in the Black Panther Party. They called in Brother Mutulu to help and assist with that. In the midst of that, another Mutulu was in a car accident with two of his sons. I'm not sure Pac was one of them, and another elder and ancestor we have to acknowledge, Yuri Kochiyama, recommended to him that he try acupuncture to deal with them. And then, so he found out the efficacy of acupuncture there. And I think when they first started in Lincoln Hospital, they didn't have no needles. They was using massaging people with oils and stuff, right? And then he goes to China, right? And gets it from over there.
Man, now you just dropped it. You did a mic dropper. I didn't. A lot of us, Dequi, ride with me on this. Yeah. I didn't know Yuri was the first link to that.
Yeah, Yuri. The story he tells.
That's a mic.
Yuri, after he was in a car accident, shifts him over there, and of course, he and Yuri were close comrades. They worked together, around political prisoners.
Who was that? That's what she did.
Oh man. When I was like 19, 20, they had a newsletter called Take the Land. It wasn't Free the Land, it was Take the Land. And Yuri would send me the newsletters, but it would take, I was in California. It would take months before I got it because the feds would be messing with the mail. You know what I mean? But she and Mutulu worked so very closely on many things. So she was the one that suggested that. So we want to uplift her name. And again, another link to Malcolm, right?
That's right.
I look at Mutulu as like a part of that Malcolm generation, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. He's part of that thread because his teachers were the contemporaries of Malcolm, right? And so he comes out of that generation, just like Sekou, right? Yeah. Sekou went to those OAU meetings with him.
That's right.
So, if we're talking about the legacy of Malcolm X, they are right there.
Immediate legacy. That's right.
We're all blessed to work with these people and study with these people and live and love these people, and so that's how he got connected to acupuncture. He became certified and began to promote and I don't know this very well. There's an article we have on it, but he actually developed a form of treating people with under substance abuse. So he not only learned it, but he became an innovator in acupuncture, right? And trained
doctor
people.
That's right.
I looked at a video. He talked to our children at the Colombo School when he gets out. And there's an Asian guy sitting behind him. He trained him. It's stereotypically we think the Asians were treating us, but are teaching us. But Mutulu was training black folks or New Africans. He was training Asian. He training white folks.
Listen. Let me tell you my story. Let me real quick. Tanakil Jones, y'all know Tanakil, right? Yeah. Right. Tanakil for a while ran one of the treatment centers for the Vera Institute, right? Who was the doctor that she had in the house? Alan Berkman, when Alan got it.
Yeah.
Okay. What was Alan doing? Alan was working with recovering addicts with acupuncture that he learned from Mutulu.
as well as Dr. Barbara.
That's how I came in contact with it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we
and a lot of people who were taken in other places, and white comrades too.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of what Mutulu was able to do, and how people were able to politicize people to understand that drugs are a war on the people, and it is meant for you to become addicted and dependent on it. And with using acupuncture to release people from the prison of drug misuse and abuse, right? That was not in the capitalist framework. Right? Because like I said, there are people today who have been taking methadone for decades.
Yes.
And so there's billions of dollars in that. And so that's the beauty of, I had some acupuncture today when Akinyele talks about people studying, like that's the tradition that Mutulu is a part of: struggle and healing. Love, struggle, and healing. Right. And so when you think about him being,
on both fronts.
People are inside and they're languishing. Right. They're not languishing. Mutulu was not languishing. Sekou was not languishing. Majid was not languishing. None of our political prisoners are languishing. They are working and organizing and mentoring and fathering, so that when those brothers that they come into contact with behind those walls, they come out here. They sent thousands of people back into the streets to be an asset and to serve the people. You're not doing that if you're languishing, right? So they weren't resting on anything. They were continuing the work. And when you hear people who were inside with any of these brothers, Noah Washington has been gone 20 years. There are people who still speak of him, right? So, and it's going to be that way with Mutulu, because his legacy is such that there are people whose lives he helped to transform, that when they come out to the outside, they are now working to transform their community. That's part of his legacy. So acupuncture is part of his legacy, but so healing the body, but also healing the mind and the spirit of these young brothers and older brothers that he has come into contact with over the 30-odd years that he was in prison. So, when people say, like, how do we want to honor, it's saying his name is important, but continuing the work. How are you going to serve your community? How are you going to serve the people? That's how you heal the people, whether it's mind, body, or spirit, right? Because we got to heal in all of those different ways, because that's what Mutulu was about. That's why I wanted to share that poem. Like, he's part of a tradition of healing, part of a tradition of Black love, of revolutionary love, of Black resistance. And so that's why we love and honor Mutulu. And I used to laugh because I said, Mutulu is straight up a doctor. When he would write, I couldn't understand a thing he said. Because, doctors, you can't ever read their handwriting. You couldn't read
my letters. It's true. That's right.
Unfortunately, Dequi, he would oftentimes send me some of that stuff to if he was making a public statement, and I have to
read it. Yeah,
I had to get with somebody else, and we would collaborate to try to figure it out.
Right.
I know what you're talking about.
I'm like, brother, just call us. Yeah, he was always giving people work and delegating. Sekou would say, yo, brother, I'm not working for you. He's like, he calls and he got jobs. He got tasks for people.
No doubt.
So call us and tell us, or put it in an email, or let somebody else write it, because we cannot read your handwriting. I said, that brother is a real doctor.
No doubt. I love that. Dequi, if you see that love struggle and healing theme again, I just wrote it down. When you see it in an article or something, you know the origin of it.
Okay. That's what we do. We learn from, teach, and share with others. That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we love Mutulu for all that he has represented, and like, he refused to, thankfully, every time they gave him 6 months, he superseded that, because he's like, y'all not dictating my life. his resistance was such that you are not going to call it. Allah is going to call it, and not you. And so they gave him 6 months. I don't know how many times they gave him 6 months.
Right.
Over a year ago, I think it was at Ahmed over Femi's home going. His daughter Setua told me they gave my father 6 months, and I heard before that 6 months.
6 months, right.
And so it, kept on moving, and that's why I think it was a tremendous blessing that he did get the compassionate release, and he was able to be with family and loved ones. You mentioned men he was incarcerated with. One brother I know who was incarcerated with him. He saw him maybe the week before he died, and he said he was able to go in the hospital and massage his feet. You know what I'm saying? My niece actually would see him every Friday, and she would do his hair. He wouldn't have had that in lockdown, right? And then he gave us so much.
Right.
When he comes home, gave us so much in that 7 or 6 month, whatever it was, that he was able to come home. So I know it was a struggle for him, but I think it was a tremendous victory that we got him home. He said he had died already in the prison, in the prison hospital. And so, as you said, Allah and his ancestors and his own will and strength and our love and his love for us. Because when you mention love at the beginning, that love, struggle, and healing, Mutulu always is talking about love, and he would not have been able to sustain himself.
That's right.
All these decades.
That's right.
Without love, being in isolation, being being targeted, being separated from your family.
Yes.
So love is part of what kept him going. The love he had for our people, and
right. Yeah, well, that's like what Chase says. Revolutionaries are guided by great love for the people, and you hold on to that love. And every one of our political prisoners has endured isolation and solitary confinement. Sekou did 19 years in solitary confinement. Sundiata did decades in solitary confinement. Imam Jamil Alameen. All of these people, because it's an attempt to break people's spirit. But it makes me smile. It makes me angry because this is America, and this is, it's like these. America means prisons, like Malcolm said, and their prisons are death camps that are meant to murder people. Not everybody, but in particular, our captured freedom fighters. And so the fact that Mutulu was able to be home with people massaging his feet, holding his hand, praying for him and with him, cooking him food, like Dr. Kakai Patterson, you got to give it up to Kakai, who was there with him, taking care of him, doing things with him and for him. Mike, these people that were able to love up on him in a humane sort of a way. And whereas Majid died in a prison bed, on a prison cell, like people were killed with handcuffed to a bed. So I am thankful for that as far as Mutulu. But at the same time, every time one of our recently released political prisoners cross over to the other side, I'm thinking about Noah and Abdul Majid and Kawesi Balagoon and Bashir Hamid. I'm thinking about the people who didn't make it, who didn't have anybody able to run. I mean, I can't really say, because maybe some of those brothers definitely took care of our brothers because they build community, right? So they make families and they build community. So I do know from one of the last times that I visited Noah before he died that there was brothers inside taking care of him, because that's who wheeled him into the hospital visiting room was brothers. So, but it's still different to not be in those cages, right? So I think about that all the time.
Let me ask you this. Let me take y'all down. And we're having this conversation in a media context, right? And there is the recent Dear Mama that gave Mutulu a minute, and there's the feature film that was on Pac and that had somebody do a representation on of Mutulu. And then there's the phenomena of hip hop himself and how artists have picked up this question and not picked up this question. What are y'all thoughts on the depiction of Mutulu Shakur in media and culture?
I think I'm gonna take some of Mutulu's thinking to address that. One time, like I said, I was teaching classes on in some of the prisons he was held captive. And one time we had a conversation, the group had a conversation on hip hop. And I bring my students in. One of the students was critical of the artist, hip hop artist Nas, saying that, you know, his messages were contradictory. And Mutulu intervened and he said, look, when Pac mentioned my name, hundreds of thousands of people knew my name. He said, that's not necessarily Pac's job to teach revolution, even though he did in his way. But he said, that's your job. To my student who made the comment, he said, that's your role. And so you have to take whatever is mentioned about me or others, Mumia, whoever, and take and build on that with our youth and people who are listening and consuming that popular culture. And so me as a teacher, I assign people to watch Dear Mama. And then I ask them more questions and give them some more stuff to read. Right. You know what I mean? I might critique it, you know, because some of it, when I watched the movie, the popular movie on Pac that they had out a few years ago, it was definitely inaccurate, you know, in terms of Mutulu's role in it. But in Dear Mama, one of the things that really hit me is, and I never knew this, but they described the story, and I think Afeni's sister Glow was telling the story, and it was after Pac had been convicted. And he was really kind of trying to figure out what he's going to do, right? And he says, look, tell Mutulu, he was thinking about not turning himself in. He said, tell Mutulu that one of us got away. So it just showed, again, it kind of communicated because Pac, throughout his stardom, maintained his relationship with Mutulu, visited the prison when Mutulu was in Lompoc Penitentiary in California and performed there. He also took this whole thing about the Thug Code. Some people think that Pac co-authored that. That was co-authored by Mutulu and Brothers Inside. And Pac just kind of championed it and, you know, let them use his name. And it's really, I know there was a lot of debate around it when it came out because some people were saying, well, you're compromising with criminality. Yeah. And I always tell brothers and sisters, and, you know, it took me a minute to get with it too, I ain't gonna lie. But I think it wasn't speaking to those of us who have been in the movement for several years. It's speaking to those street elements again. And so how do we, I don't know what it's like for y'all in Jersey and Brooklyn, but down here, the street elements, sometimes they're out of control, you know what I mean? And so we got to find a way to have a conversation to bring peace in our communities to a certain level. And I think that's what Mutulu was trying to do. But again, to go back to your question, yeah, I think some of it is like, you know, there's this American Gangster documentary on that I participated in. And when it first was being proposed, it was like, American Gangster, do we want to do that? And Mutulu again said, no, go ahead and do that. I show it sometimes over the years in my classes, but then I can correct or challenge the narrative because it has a state's narrative in there as well. And so, you know, but I also give them stuff that I've written and other people have written to challenge those narratives too and give people perspective. Our people usually, they can watch that stuff and pick it out. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, I read a book, and it said Max Stanford, and later known as Muhammad Ahmed, was the most dangerous man in America. And I said, oh, I got to find out who this brother is.
That's right.
You know, I got to find out who he is. And Jack Hoover said the most dangerous man in America. He's somebody I need to know about. Mm-hmm. And that started me to reading his articles in the Black Scholar and things of that nature when I was in high school. And so I think our people, oftentimes we think they're unconscious, but they discerning. A lot of times we have oppositional consciousness. If we know the enemy is saying this, we know they ain't speaking in our best interest, so we're going to look at alternatives. We might make mistakes in doing that, but again, that's the role of those of us who've been experienced in the movement. We got to be able to communicate with folks and give them a more revolutionary, radical, insurgent perspective, and help people to discern from the BS.
Yeah, I think. Well, I can't really speak to the Dear Mama, but I know that this system is never about telling our stories, our histories, and our her stories, and we always have to be careful with who's telling the story, why, and what do they hope to get out of it. Sekou and I watched 2 episodes. We haven't seen any more. And when you know certain things, is very everything is always a teachable moment. That's what Sekou says, which is what you do with your students, right, Akinyele? The problem is everybody doesn't get to have those teachable moments. So right. Then they walk away looking at something, and Hollywood has become the arbiter of new African history, right? So people think they know Malcolm because they watched Spike Lee's movie. They think they know Harriet because they watched the movie. I can just say that, from off the top, 3 things I took issue with that is I didn't see Yasmin Fula, who I know raised Tupac, and I didn't see Yaki, her and Sekou's son. Now right. He grew up in their household.
Right.
Formative years of his development. Yasmin she comes out of that movement, right? And so she was also pivotal in shaping him. So why was that left out? But people watching it won't know that, right? So then it becomes a distorted, revisionist narrative. And I swear, I hope and pray that when I'm gone, there is never anyone who had a fight with me that gets to tell my story.
I think too that actually I know that he and the brother had that fight, but I think he did my own perspective and knowing Pac as well. And I do agree with you that Yasmin's role in Pac's development, her role in working with Khalfani and Mutulu are essential. But I think he did do a good job. You got, it's hard when you're trying to produce something and you got 2 hours or you got a however limited amount of time, and then you don't know the whole story doing the research. I didn't have politics either. It was malicious from hearing his. Okay. I think he's even in some of the interviews I saw, he's even been self-critical in his part of the conflict he had with Pac when they were both younger. So I'll give him that credit. Okay. On from that perspective. I do think though we need to tell some of those stories.
Absolutely.
We need to tell, because Yasmin now she has her own memoir that she's written.
Tell everybody what Yasmin we're talking about, so folks, because a lot of
Yasmin Fula, who Dequi could probably provide more information than me, but from what I know about her, she gets involved in the movement defending the New York 21. And then when Khalfani and her develop a close comradeship working relationship, she was one of the founders of the National Task Force for COINTELPRO litigation and research with Mutulu and Khalfani. They were like the intelligence on
decades ago, before anybody was talking about COINTELPRO.
Hey, yeah. That's how I learned about COINTELPRO from them. I can remember when Mutulu came to the West Coast and he's sitting at Brother Watani's table and he's telling us and showing us these damn papers and stuff like that. I didn't know. I mean, I heard about it,
Right.
but I really didn't know what it was, and I didn't know it could have significance in terms of getting our people out. Because after that, he recruited us to work on getting Geronimo out of captivity, and so. But no, I agree with Dequi. It's a lot of unsung sheroes and heroes in our movement, and Yasmin is one. People who work behind the scenes, they ain't necessarily spokespersons.
Right.
They the ones giving the speeches, but they the ones doing the behind the scenes, day-to-day work for our people. And like Dequi said,
watching Dequi grow up like that in this movement is telling, just like you said, right? She was one of the cubs that had been nurtured and whatnot, in the Black Panther Collective, trying to move the work. There's reasons why Sekou and whatnot are out, because how she moved and grew in the work, right? In the tradition of those sisters.
Right, no doubt. All right, that's what I said. I respect her.
And I appreciate that.
Pardon?
That's why I appreciate that, because I had great teachers. All I'm doing is passing on what has been passed on to me. So when I talk to young sisters and young brothers and I meet people, I'm simply doing what was done, what we're supposed to do, like what Asada said in the poem, carrying on. Right?
That's right. Now let me add this too about Yasmin, right? Because we have to also appreciate that. Yeah, right after Pac gets killed, right? And that's Sekou's son too. Right. Her son, Yaki, he gets killed under strange circumstances. All politics are local. It happened right next door in Orange, right? No one talks about that, right? What are the links? What are the hidden hands in that, right? The politics of hip hop and the politics of struggle coming into hip hop. How does that influence that? Our antennas need to be up, and we need to be in a position to do that kind of PE to tell these stories. Now, I wanted to add something also that you lifted up, Akinyele, too, because I have, during a lot of these years recently, I had the responsibility of dealing with these heads in the new Black Panther Party, and dealing and more than anything, I wanted to get at the pig, right? But more than anything, because the streets were so out of control, the community wanted us to deal with the street organizations. So the tool that we used, and I had my troops use, was the code that Mutulu developed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I said, y'all in the pop, y'all in the hip hop, y'all need to get with the code.
Right.
There was a time I'm going back to when I was a knucklehead in the streets, in the generation ahead of me on the streets. We did have a code. We didn't mess with our kids that were going to school. We let them go. We wanted them to go. There were certain things that were different that we lost in the crack wave and all of that and whatnot. Because coming up with that code was important. Somebody had to speak to that.
Yeah.
Right.
So even
I agree with you on that. It is
right there.
Even in terms of the streets, there's a intergenerational gap. Whereas like the street folk in our generation, they had a certain level of consciousness, I would say, and I think that was lost. But I think that COINTELPRO plays a role in that
directly,
because when you had a removal of certain people on the street who could garner that respect from them brothers and sisters on the street, if they're taken away, if they're in exile, if they're in captivity, or they're dead, then we have a bit. One of the reasons I think they kept that incarcerated for so long, because they knew
and in solitary confinement. Back to Dequi's point earlier, absolutely.
Right. They were even concerned about his contact with the guards and stuff. And so he was having influence on some of the guards.
Yeah, I mean, they transferred Jaleel Muntakim because he was able to squelch a would-be rebellion inside, and they said if he could stop it, he could start it. So let's get him out of here.
That's right.
Well, that thing in Malcolm, right? That man has too much power.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I always tell people, whether you know about COINTELPRO or not, we are living the legacy of COINTELPRO, because those 4 tenets that it had about credibility, about making sure there was no black messiah, about preventing the long-term coalition of
that's right.
black youth. Right. We are living that. So between the war on black liberation, the so-called war on terror, the so-called war on drugs, where they planted drugs and then locked people up. First they locked up the revolutionaries, then they locked up the fathers, then they locked up the mothers, then they locked up the children that were left behind. They put them in foster care. This has been a concerted war on black folks that started in 1619 and is manifested in different ways throughout the decades. And so we are living the legacy of that. All of this is by design. It ain't just happenstance. It ain't because we just, we don't want to love ourselves and love each other. Because every time black folks have come together to build the Black Wall Street, Elaine, Arkansas, Wilmington, North Carolina, whenever we've had self-sustaining communities, independent schools, they have always come down. The Black Panther Party was considered the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States because they was feeding hungry children.
That's right.
Because they were highlighting and exposing the contradictions. So they had to stop that, because they don't want people to know who the real enemy is. They want people to think that we are each other's enemy. And so there are those of us who are fortunate enough to get into college, to have a professor like you. But then from me working in high school, there are some kids that stop coming to school in the 9th grade.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens to them?
Right.
Then they may be out there creating their extra legal survival, and then they don't become politicized until they go behind the wall when they meet someone that helps them to see who the real enemy is.
That's actually what some of the brothers were saying in some of our programs. That I remember we had one of the last times before they blocked me from coming in anymore. We had a program and Jamal was there. Jamal Joseph came. Marimba Ani came. Ahmed Obafemi came. Chaz Williams. We had Mutulu was the brainchild. He called it, we don't want just a regular African-American History Month. He called it Black Bloc History. So he wanted to bring in some of the people who had this street experience. And so we broke off into different groups. And one young brother who had been from DC had been selling drugs to take care of his family, single parent. He had put his brothers and sisters through college.
That's right.
And so he said he realized that he was helping his family, but destroying our community. And then he said he didn't realize that till he was in these classes. And, and I asked him, well, what do you see as a solution? And he said the same classes we have inside here, we need outside in our communities to talk to our youth. And he also proposed we needed to be thinking about cooperative economics as a solution. That brother from those classes, I remember when first hearing him rap, because he's an excellent rapper. He was talking about his raps would be talking about shanking brothers in the neck and stuff like that. But then he started rapping on New African themes. Then when he got transferred to another prison, he's teaching about our history and culture at other institutions. And so, so, to me, I feel like, and I've been teaching for like 40 years now. And that's some of the best teaching education I've ever been involved in, working with brothers inside. I taught high school, I taught, college level, but that was the richest experience I've had working with students or working as a teacher. And again, I learned a lot from Mutulu in that process, working with him during that time and working in the same classes. Excellent with the term they use in education, pedagogy. Mutulu had that. He knew how to speak to our people. and I agree with Dequi, even though he wasn't a good writer. Not writer in terms of the ideas together. That penmanship needed some work.
Yeah. Right. But they, like you said, they are educated, because I remember Majid used to say he used to teach, because America is a criminal enterprise. And so what Majid would do was teach about the U.S. government using the mafia.
Whoa.
So that to break stuff down so that young people could understand it. And they got it, right? Because it don't need to be way up there. Bring it down so that people can relate to it and they can get it. You know, that saying, make it plain, keep it simple. That's what we do. And because then, you know, like Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. When young people know better, then they do better. So we can't get mad at young people because they're acting and reacting and reactionary and have internalized the self-hatred and the violence, because they live with violence. There's nothing more violent than poverty and homelessness and miseducation, right? Those things are violent. So when you don't have food to eat, that's violence. So you trying to survive to do that. So we got to teach it like that, and not just like you're violent because you're fighting each other. No, there's a reason why you're fighting each other, because you've been taught to distrust and to hate and to not like, right? But when we build community, then we know better and we do better. None of us knows what we don't know. It's only when, like you said, with that brother, he said, when it comes to us. That's the beauty of the Black freedom struggle.
That's right.
Is that we learn who we are. We learn about the people who came before us, right? And just because people did not mean that they were not brilliant. Harriet Tubman was brilliant. Didn't read or write a lick, but she was brilliant. And there's a whole lot of other people. So it's how do we reach them to help them see that nothing is more important than freedom and self-determination.
Talk about
right?
that.
Capitalism makes them think otherwise, because they're using people who look like them to promote the glamorization of opulence and capitalism. And I was reading Joy James's book today about revolutionary love, and she said something about we talk about the capture of our freedom fighters, and we talk about the capture of us as Africans who were enslaved, but she said something about the capture of culture under colonization. So when they're talking about 50 years of hip hop, it's really 50 years of the capture of culture under colonization.
What's the title of that book, Dequi?
I'm gonna text it to you, brother.
Okay.
I would have to get up and go. I would have to get up and get it. But it's Joy James. Yeah. And I put that on Instagram today because when I read it, I'm like, this is powerful. The capture of culture under colonization. Because that's what we're living. And those young people don't know that. They think that's real hip hop.
Right. Believe it or not, there's like 2 or 3 things already out of this conversation that's going to be in my curriculum this fall. So I want to thank both of y'all.
That's right. Pick them weapons up wherever you find them. That's right.
That's right.
Listen, now, isn't that now? There's a memorial coming up in Atlanta for Mutulu, right? Give us a specific.
August 6th, there's a memorial coming up for Mutulu, and it's going to be in 2 parts. And I have to apologize because the space for one of them is limited. It's only 300 people. So I could give you if you can send on your network later on for those who want to attend. They have to send send to a particular email address, and then they get a invitation so they can attend. Everybody else will get the Zoom link. And then that evening, and that'll be at 11 a.m. on Sunday, August 6th. That evening at a theater in Atlanta, we'll be showing Dope is Death. And there'll be a panel discussion afterwards, which will include Mutulu Shakur, Mutulu's son.
Want to shout out Lisa
on August 6th. So I will send that on you. I apologize for not being prepared with that information right now. It's been real busy since he passed. A lot of requests and things of that nature. Not to mention my grandchildren.
I was trying to hold up this conversation until let our internal forces need to do, and then we can have the conversation later just to keep it going. But the folks, the heads that I work with, and said, well, go ahead and go ahead and start. I said, all right, okay, let me see who I get.
I also want to note that today is the birthday of Baba Bilal Sunni Ali, one of the comrades of Sekou and Mutulu.
And working hard on Imam Jamil's case too right now.
Very much. From day one.
Yeah.
As soon as the incident happened, Bilal was out on the street. He lived not far from where the incident occurred, and he has been organizing on Imam Jamil ever since. He was on the street challenging what was going on with him, and some of our younger comrades were out on the street with him in that community, and people were kind of terrorized in the community at that time. But Bilal has been on the case. And I also have to give uplift Imam Jamil's family, his son Kyrie, and his wife Karima. Tremendous leadership in the midst of everything going on. Got to mention that Karima's from Queens too, and her older sister, worked with Herman Ferguson.
Wow.
yeah. Her sister became an ancestor a few years ago. And I'm sorry, one of the things I regret is I didn't get her story documented. But I know they had great love for Baba Herman Ferguson, Mama Yilua.
Indeed, we are blessed by their presence on this side for a time.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I want you to each give out any closing thoughts that you want to share with folks on an organizing thought to our young heads, hip hop listeners. One of the things that I used to do, some of us used to do, this is like the 80s and whatnot. We cassettes, right? We'd have Malcolm's cassette tapes, and we would give them to DJs, and we would give them to young heads and whatnot, and that would as their voices came out, who they sampling, right? So what we have in media land in terms of Mutulu's voice and his thoughts, even though it's not a lot that they would look at, right? What we have, y'all sample that stuff, put it right back out. One of my favorite representations of Mutulu in current media, of course, is Black Panther Party had some Asian brothers, and one was Lilu Lee, who gave us all power to the people. One of the best films on the Black Panther Party by a Black Panther, right? Mutulu is in that strong. And that film was in the 90s when he was still quite healthy. Now he was in that very strong. Y'all want something to sample? Sample some of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because we got it. Yeah. It's like Brother Akinyele said about us telling our story, which we know it's harder because, thankfully, Akinyele was able to get that book printed, and I can't imagine what he had to go through to get a book printed with the title "We Will Shoot Back."
Sometimes the ancestors be with us,
Absolutely.
And they really guided the writing of it. So we just have to push. And Baba Herman and Yalua, they published his biography by
self-published. Yeah.
We just had to be determined and creative.
Warrior, y'all looking for the book.
And keep in mind that Mutulu did at least one hip hop project while he was incarcerated called Dare to Struggle. And so some of it you can find on YouTube with artists who were inside and outside. Quiet as kept, Nipsey Hussle is on that by another name. He wasn't Nipsey Hussle yet.
Wow.
And so some of the brothers inside, and Mutulu guided that whole project. He did a little bit after he came home. I'm not sure what stage it got to. But we need to keep that in mind, make sure those projects go forward and we don't even lose that.
That's right. Lift up the word. Keep it visible.
Oh, I do want to say one thing. I almost forgot. One of the his comrades, comrade actually of Yuri, went to visit him about 3 days before he passed. And I'll give you the whole poem later on, but she writes a poem, but then she has the last words she heard him say. And that was, we have lots of work to do. So Mutulu is still thinking about work.
Yep.
And one of the things he had, I used to kid him. I didn't get to see him after he got out, but I talked to him on the phone. And I said, man, you like the new African Pope out there, because everybody's coming to have an audience with you. You know, everybody was coming. Even the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen
He might not go.
came and met with Mutulu to get him to be a consultant on dealing with the unhoused situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so people were coming, professors. I was on the phone with him one time. We were on the phone. Hey, Professor James Smalls just came in. So, you know, people were just coming out there to make their pilgrimage to see Baba Mutulu before he transitioned. That's what he meant. And so when Dequi mentions love, you know, the love he felt for us were felt by multitudes of folks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right up to the very end.
Right up to the very end.
Right.
Well, thank you, Brother Zaid, for inviting us to be here and talk about our brother and talk about those folks who have come before us, who helped to lay some of the groundwork that we continue to carry on in the respective ways that we do. It's really appreciated. We must tell our histories and her stories, like Brother Akinyele said. So thank you for that. And I always say to people, if you want to continue to honor Mutulu, then you carry on the work. You carry on the tradition of the Black freedom struggle, like Asada said in her poem. Be a part of the movements that people are a part of. Do something. Remember our political prisoners in your work on a daily basis. Write to them. Go to the JerichoMovement.com to get people's addresses. You don't know what to say? Just introduce yourself and ask if I can do anything. What can I do? Right? But don't say, what can I do? And then let them answer you, and then you don't do it.
Don't do it.
Right.
I would say also go to Mutulushakur.com too for some of the events that are coming up. I forgot about that. Thanks. They tweak my memory.
We lean on each other.
I did post it. Now, before y'all go, I got to ask y'all what we call a ritual question here, right? This is supposed to be a hip hop talk show. It is. I'm the jazz OG on the show, right? But the question and y'all been on before. We've asked it before, right? Who are y'all listening to right now in the land of hip hop in terms of what's got you going, what's got you flowing, right? And of course, we can assume a lot of Pac in that because of who we are, right? But just on your own, who are you listening to these days?
You know, I've been listening back to Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I love that CD. So I just started, I've been listening back. I've been playing that.
Jersey
and
girl.
Someone told me about someone named No Name, but I haven't gotten to. She's supposed to burn me a CD so I can hear her. But this young sister that I've met told me about this sister named No Name that she thought was really good.
I've heard the No Name, but I haven't heard her work yet either. We trying to find
it.
Okay.
Two I'll give. One is I just was in Brooklyn at the International African Arts Festival, and they had a tribute to Pharoah Sanders. So I've been listening to a lot of Pharoah Sanders lately, but new stuff. And I know he's contradictory as well. But Killer Mike came out with a new album. He mentions Mutulu and Asada in the first song on the album.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what's
yeah. Well, he has before. he has before on previous albums, but then on the other hand, he met with Governor Kemp, so and said disparaging things about Stacey Abrams. So we have contradictions. Got to challenge some of our people.
Yes.
At the same time, uplift them when they do something positive.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. That's right. Absolutely. And our lives are full with contradictions. We want self-determination and liberation for people all over the world, but we have to use these cell phones that are crippling people in other parts of the world. So it's a balancing act. Our lives are contradictions. We just figure out where we can draw the line and where we can't.
Yeah.
I say.
Mm-hmm.
I say to that, free the land, and thank you both.
Free the land.
For discussion, right? The discussion will continue. Some of the folks that we have mentioned in this conversation, we're going to try and bring on this show. And I really appreciate y'all lifting up Yasmin. I really do, because she is one of those unsung heroines in our struggle who needs to be lifted up and is touched by this in a deeply personal way on both sides of it. Because a contributor and then the fallout of losing a loved one in this, right? Sekou, we wanted to get Sekou. I'll give him our greetings to Kui. I know he's handling the family situation tonight.
He's in Atlanta.
Yeah, Jamal.
I didn't know he was still here.
Yeah.
And Watani, to the great soldiers who, tried to give Tupac that guidance when he needed it, and we're in the documentary. Those folks we're going to try and get them on it. So we want folks to look forward. We used to say years ago, forward ever, backwards never. We want folks to look forward to how we continue and develop this conversation. And we want folks to look forward to it in ways to figure out how to continue to uplift this legacy and to move this work and to drop these seeds in our community so a new generation can take it forward. Right? So right on, y'all. Free the land.
Free the land. Thank you, brother. Akinyele, take good care. Tell my sister I send my greetings and love.
She can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
She said free the land back at you.
Okay, cool. All right. Y'all keep well. Have a great weekend.
Thank you both.
All right, too. Y'all stay safe and continue the good work you're doing.
We will. All right. Peace.
All right, y'all. All right, now we should be having Rhino has come. Dawn has come. All right. Dawn, you were upside down. I was about to say, I said, my little daughter's doing somersaults.
In this work, you better be flexible.
Yeah, right. As we
so how's everything going, Baba? That was a real heavy segment you just got completed.
Who you tell it? And then we could go on for days. But like I said, we're going to continue the dialogue. We're going to bring some of those warrior elders in, some of those contemporaries of Pac. We're going to continue that, right? And so because this is so much to tell. There's so many layers to that, right? But Dawn, before we go to the land of hip hop with Rhino, I wanted you to let everybody know about what's going to happen next week. Next week is the anniversary of the Mighty Newark Anti-Violence Coalition. The anniversary, tragically born and baptized in the blood on our streets. Keisha Allen shot to death, just going to the store for her babies, going to pick up her babies up in Mika and Elizabeth Ave in Newark. Here's a pop and sees her intestines on the damn ground, and she's gone, right? And the young man who I've known since he was 7 years old, who was in the South Ward city councilman at the time, said, we're going to use some of our protest tactics to shake this up. We can't. This stuff is getting out of control, and folks are starting to accept this as being normal. That young man was Ras Barak, and that started us shutting down Newark streets around the question of violence for 155 straight weeks, bum rushing and crushing the narrative that said that Black folks don't talk about violence when in our own community, or we crush it like nobody else can talk about it because it's our pain, our blood, our kids, our suffering. The Mighty Newark Anti-Violence Coalition became the embodiment of that. And we lost a great sister who we celebrated a few weeks ago in Natasha Allen, someone who came to us from the very first protests, right? When we were in the way of her bus. And shortly after that, she loses her nephew to gun violence and had been with us ever since. And was one of our strongest voices on the streets whenever we were in the streets, and somebody we love dearly. And so this year's anniversary of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition is going to be a tribute to our sister and our daughter. Dawn, tell us about that.
Yes, sir. So we will be convening in true NABC style on Thursday at 6 p.m. The location is 10 17th Avenue at the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, which is another brainchild and birthed out of the struggle and the revolution of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition. The intent is to continue to bring light to the violence that's in our community, but to make sure that our community know that it's not business as usual. And our celebration for our anniversary, it's twofold, because it is still celebrating the life of Natasha Allen and mourning her death, because it was truly a great loss due to the work that she did, and not just the work, just the soul that she was. And the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, which is located, like I said, at 10 17th Avenue. I knew she wasn't going to stay quiet long enough. But
no child, that's the struggle child. She ain't supposed to be quiet. If
right.
Mama
Sue let me know while she was in my womb that she's my warrior baby. So I might as well just get ready to buckle down and get a bow and arrow in her hand immediately. So we're looking at inviting everybody is invited. We're going to circle it up as we normally do. Pour libation, call on our ancestors, speak about the principles and the rules of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, and do some recognitions and some love time. That's what we're doing. It's just about loving on each other. We have now coined the term reclaiming our village, right? Like, we're reclaiming the aunties and uncles in our communities, the grandmothers, the uncles. We need everybody to join in and move our community forward in a village style, because we realize more than ever that we can't do this separate. Like, it's no such thing as a village and everybody working in silos. So the coalition is definitely bringing in that family format again.
And we're not at all bothered by the music that we're hearing. That is that child making herself known to everybody.
Right? Yes, Cousin Rose.
Because couple things, Dawn, that are important that I want folks to appreciate. Let's stop and take a minute and talk about two things. One, 17th Ave is something now, but was something different not terribly long ago. And not only do we have the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, we have a number of initiatives doing this work. You are the driving force in the Brick City. Tell us about those two things, and then talk about time.
So when everybody else around the country was saying, defund the police, get rid of them, the city of Newark is our police do what they supposed to for the most part, thanks to the consent decree and the demand for the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Like, we have a little accountability with our police. So what we would like to see is reallocation of funds to our people, and the mayor seems to make sure that it happens. Listen, I know what she wants. Just give me 1 second.
It's all right. It's all right.
So with the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, to have it be the police department, that the first precinct where, a lot of the rebellion kicked off there. There's stories of a lot of people who lost their lives inside of that place. And for us to be using this as a place of healing and trauma recovery, it speaks volumes to the work and the struggle that our people have been in, especially in the city of Newark. And it's just a good feeling knowing that, no, it's not the precinct anymore. Now it is the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery. There's a lot of a heavy spirit in that place based on the trauma that's connected to it. And so not only did we receive that building, but I think 5% or 3% of the police budget was allocated to the department. And for every 100 police officers that are hired, 10 social workers are hired. So now we have social workers in our precincts, social workers inside of the juvenile processing center. So our people is getting the assistance that they need. And all of this came from the brainchild and the struggle of some of the demands of the Anti-Violence Coalition.
Mhm. And tell us about the Brick City Peace Collective and what the Brick City Peace Collective does and their role in this.
So the collective is, and we're growing. The collective is organizations that have the same ideology of changing what our community trajectory is. So it's schools, there's elected officials. It's very similar to the coalition, but the collective come together and say, okay, well, we see what the problem is. How do we support other organizations, whether it's funding, capacity building? It can look like technical support. How do we fund people? How do we support them in making sure that they're able to get grants and whatever it is that they need, or access to the doctors that may have the data, or the departments that need to know what's going on a grassroots. From a lot of perspectives, is top down. So the collective is, we're all on the same playing level field. You come to that table, you have ideas, you understand what's going on. We understand that there's no big I, little you. All of us come with a clear slate. Like, we are not working in silos because it's not working for us. This is how we're doing this in a bigger way. So we just received, and Kalisha will kill me if I got this wrong. My executive director just secured $16 million for the Brick City Peace Collective, and an RFP went out for more organizations to help with high-risk intervention work and to help with safe passage and domestic violence and all types of things that affect our community. I just don't want her to scream in the phone for y'all. I'm sorry.
It's all right. You need to introduce it to us. Tell everybody Princess's name.
Kaza. This is Kaza, Rose, and Jerry Reynolds.
Now, how about that? How about that? You better now, baby. She's waving. Right on, baby.
And so through the collective,
you've been waiting for. And
yes.
Your own recollections, your own share on Natasha. We all had our own stories. Tell us some of your stories on our sister.
Oh man, Natasha. Oh man. Where you seen me, if I was being a troublemaker, you better believe my sister wasn't too far behind me, because we were on go together. It's council meetings where people were very upset with us because, no, y'all not gonna say that lie on us. You're not gonna do that. We both got blocked on Instagram by the then mayor Cory Booker, because I think I said on his Instagram that I needed a hot pink bulletproof vest because the lies he was telling about the people getting shot here. And Natasha, she got blocked as well. She made the superintendent at the time get up and walk off the stage and almost shut down the complete meeting, the school board meeting, because she asked her, did she want her
Cammy Anderson that we're talking about.
Cammy Anderson, we were talking about.
Demon to lead the occupation of our school system. And it was one of the unsung stories of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, and the also at the time the Newark Student Union, that coming together for that last push to get rid of her and to get rid of them and to get our school back. Tasha's voice was strong in that, right? Supporting our babies when they did their occupation and turning it up on that lead occupier, and the way folk were dancing around when we needed somebody to turn it up on her behind. Keep going.
Right.
Keep going.
And Tasha was just that. She sat in that audience, and we were patient. We was going to every meeting. It was a time where they wouldn't allow the parents inside of the school board meetings because they knew that she and I was outside. I remember one time Cory was passing out pizza in the lot across the street from her house. She's like, Dawn, he's out there. Oh, we on our way. We need to understand what you're doing about the violence. Right? We out here protesting. How come you won't meet with us? How come you won't get rid of at the time, your police chief? I think it was Gary McCarthy, because we was trying to get rid of him and Cammy Anderson at the same time. Like, all y'all gotta go. Y'all don't mean us no well. And then the softer side of Tasha.
A lot of folks don't realize she had one of them.
Right, because she was no nonsense. She did not play. She was an extreme realist. Like, no, either she rock with you or she don't. And if she rocked with you, can't nobody tell her anything bad about you.
Right.
So we raised each other's kids in my car during our rallies. Our children became aunties, and she's an auntie to my babies, and I'm an auntie doing to her daughter, and we love Sapphire. And Tasha wouldn't drive, but she entrusted us with her baby, and my husband taught her how to drive. Right, so we understood what a village concept was in our collective, in our coalition. I remember one time. Okay, so we slaughtered a lamb. We slaughtered a lamb for our Eid celebration. And nobody can ever say Dawn it was a cook. Don't let nobody lie to you, Baba, and say Dawn was a cook. Dawn not a cook. Her mother is, her husband is, her second daughter, master cooks. They're all great, great cooks. Dawn is not. I had the task of putting up the lamb. Now, this is a sacrificed lamb, so that means the meat is still warm when we got it. Now, I'm devastated. I'm like, I don't know what y'all want me to do with this. This is disgusting. Let me put it in the freezer.
By the lamb.
Right, like I just ready to eat it. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. So I put it in the freezer, the whole entire bag of lamb. So about a couple of days passed, and I opened the freezer, and the head must have been the last thing I put in there. I'm like, I don't know what to do with no damn lamb head. Like, what is this? I called Natasha. I didn't even call Tasha. Tasha called me. Dawn, bring me the lamb head. I'm gonna make you a lamb head stew. When I tell you, my sister worked that stew together. And that had to have been like 8 years ago. So every time we sacrificed a lamb, Tasha would designate it. I know my sister gonna do her thing. She put it on Facebook, like she'll make a gourmet meal, won't show no pictures, but it'll end it with, and I know you want some. And every time it never fails, at least 10 people in her comment section, yeah, we want some. Where is it? No matter what she cooked. And I'm going to miss my dear friend.
She would have been, I tell you, she would have been a wonderful Panther. Right?
Yes, she would have. Yes, she would have.
I'm going to miss you. I have to be out of town for Equal Justice USA. I'll be in Detroit, but I have a spiritual story I want to write on Natasha about how to look at Natasha through the lens of our spiritual traditions. You know, there's something significant about that call when we did her homegoing for that white and yellow. That means something coming from another place that a lot of folks may not understand consciously, but that speaks a lot to who Natasha was in terms of her own spirit. And it may take me a minute to pull the details together, but that's something I definitely want to offer up because I miss daughter dearly, as we all do. Right. So again, tell us time and place, how we're gonna get down, right? And we'll ask you the ritual question. You know?
Come on in and join us. 10 17th Avenue on Thursday, 6 p.m. We're gonna circle it up, block off on NAVC style. The difference is then we were screaming for help in the rain. Now we're the ones making the calls and making the those strong gested supports that we need. 10 17th Avenue. Come out. If you like to bring a dish, it's more than welcomed. If not, we should have more than enough food. We're not excluding anybody. All is welcome. We come in peace. We leave with peace. And carry peace with us, because peace begins with us.
That's right. That's right. May we be the healing and the peace that we seek. Thank you, daughter. Take care of that child for us and to give all the attention that she deserves. Right? She seems happy. Right, and that means everything. Right? And we need her with us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Younger. All right, so look forward to next Thursday, the 20th anniversary of the mighty Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, and we give some more love to our daughter and our sister Natasha Allen, and again, and love on ourselves, and bring the love to the streets where it's needed.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. When we want to get down, we shut it down. That's how we ride. Peace in the street, right?
Peace in the street.
Thank you, Dawn.
Good night.
DJ Rhino, ride. Let's take it home, little brother. What's going on? What's going on this week, man? Hip hop.
How you been, brother?
Man, hands are full.
Yeah, I hear.
Full. We forward is the motion.
That's it, man. And I mean, it's kind of been the same on my side. I mean, as far as on the music side of things, man. The summer is usually always the busiest time of year for me, man. You know what I mean? So I just, I've been juggling gigs and, setting up for gigs and stuff like that. So that's what's been happening with me on this end, man. But I was enjoying what I was hearing earlier about, just some of the stories of Mutulu, some of the stories of Pop. You know what I mean? And there's been some talk, a lot of talk recently about hip hop now, like the state of hip hop now, and its relation to what is it doing to society? How is it affecting society now? You know what I'm saying? And I remember back in the days, man. I was heavy into the the conscious period of hip hop, man, when it came in. I mean, I was there from the beginning when it was all, it was party and fun, and then we got into the boom bap with Run DMC and LL Cool J. You know what I'm saying? It was more of a posturing thing. I know from my generation, that was our teenage years, our early teenage years. So young black men, you get into posturing and it's that whole thing, and then we had the of course we had the crack era take place. You know what I'm saying, in society, man, and we were dealing with that. So we would get some some of the violent stuff would come up a little bit. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't too heavy in the beginning. But it was enough for something to be said, for something to be done. And that's when the conscious era came in. That's when we got the Public Enemy and the Boogie Down Productions and the X-Clans and Brand Nubian and Poor Righteous Teachers. You know what I'm saying? That was really my era. That's what really caught me and always stayed with me. You know what I'm saying? Then I remember going into the early 90s. I remember going into 92. We had Sister Soldier. This is when consciousness was at a peak in hip hop at that time. We had Sister Soldier. We had the conversion of Ice Cube going into Nation of Islam and rocking with Public Enemy and the Bomb Squad. You know what I'm saying? We had that going on. And right there, when 93 came in, right there at the peak of all of that, we had Dr. Dre and Snoop come out with The Chronic. And I remember being a part of the movements at the time. I tell the stories of, rolling with Sister Viola Plummer, Erica Ford. We were rolling with the movements at that time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember when the subject came up of the lyrical content of this new music that was coming out, talking about, The Chronic. And I remember being I was caught in the middle. At that time, man, because I was in hip hop, and for years, man, we always fought for the freedom of speech in hip hop. You know what I'm saying? Because all throughout the earliest years of hip hop, we were fighting to be heard. We were fighting to be respected. You know what I'm saying? People weren't respecting hip hop. People weren't listening to hip hop. People made a joke of hip hop and thought it was going to be a fad and thought it was something from the jump.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right. They thought it was something negative from the beginning. So, I just remember being conflicted at this time because I still stood and still stand for freedom of speech. But I also remember not personally not being into the lyrical content of this Chronic album that came out, for the most part, at least. I mean, they did have one song on there. It was a song on the album called "When the Niggas Took Over." That actually spoke to the Rodney King outbreak, the riots that took place out in L.A. when the verdict came out. Right. So that was a strong album, and that was a strong song. And I actually put that song in my resistance rap playlist because it speaks to something.
You lifted up a gem. A lot of folks. That's. I have not heard anybody talk about that at all in a long time. You lifted up a gem. Mic dropper.
Yeah. When the niggas took over, the day the niggas took over. That's the name of it. And it's heavy, man. You got to check it out, man. Anybody out there listening, definitely check it out. It's on YouTube. But yeah, for the most part, though, a lot of that stuff that was on the album, I was conflicted about. So, but the fight overall in hip hop was always freedom of speech. So there was a fight for that, and it was let through. You know what I'm saying? We had Dr. Dre and the Chronic, and it became a whole new movement out west, coming from the West Coast. Dr. Dre and Snoop, they took over. I mean, they were the ones that really influenced P. Diddy and Biggie to do what they did, because West Coast was taking over, and they, at the time, they felt, East Coast was kind of like falling to the side. But yeah, so now here we are today, from that point when things shifted to today, where people are talking about, what effect hip hop is having in society today. You know what I'm saying? And dealing with drill music and all of that. And it's a complex situation. In some ways, it's a complex situation because it's levels to it. You know what I mean? There's levels to it. There was a time where back in the day, even before hip hop, there was a time where if there was anything that had like vulgar lyrics or some kind of vulgar content to it, that was basically kept in the underground. You know what I'm saying? Even going back to like the comedy albums of Red Fox and Richard Pryor or Mom's Mabley, or you didn't hear that stuff on mainstream. That stuff wasn't mainstream material. That was stuff that you either found in underground circuits, you know what I'm saying, or in the privacy of your home. You know what I mean? And we had that in hip hop. There was times where we had that in hip hop. The vulgar stuff wasn't being played. We got the pop stuff being played on the radio. The more vulgar stuff was pretty much underground radio. You would find that stuff in like college radio or something like that. You know what I mean? But then it got to a point, after a while, you start hearing certain content, especially when it came down to, the drug game, the streets, what was going on in the streets with the drug game. A lot of that stuff just starts seeping through in mainstream radio. You're starting to hear this stuff. And even when they bleep out the curses, it's like, what they're talking about. And then they starting to bleep less of what's being said. So a lot of this stuff comes through. So it's like, all right, now it's time to question ourselves. I'm in my early 50s, right? We were just talking about hip hop in its early days when I was in my pre-teens and my early teens. Now we're here. You know what I mean? What do we do now as adults, as parents going into being grandparents? What do we do now as far as the music? And I also have to say this too, because again, and I brought this up last time I was on the show. There's got to be some understanding that hip hop is a culture. The music is rap music and hip hop culture are separate things. Now, rap music is part of the culture, but rap music, as we know, has been blown into a whole other medium, a whole other thing. You know what I mean? Aside from the culture, outside of the culture of hip hop, there's still a whole lot of elements that the corporates haven't really touched on, and which is a good thing at this point. We don't want to,
that's right.
Right. But we're dealing with this situation now where, we have kids and, like I said, even grandkids now that's coming up in a situation where we're hearing a lot of violence, a lot of vulgarity, a lot of disrespect going through the airwaves on mainstream radio. And now it's not even just mainstream radio. I mean, we're at a point where we're living in the internet world. You know what I'm saying? We got XM radio. We got stuff that you can just pull up on YouTube, and this stuff is out there. Like, how do we control it? That's the main thing. How do we control the situation? We're not trying to shut anybody down, shut anybody off, because just as the sister said earlier in the show, when you're living in violence, when you're living in poverty, that's what you know. You know what I'm saying? And this is why it's being spoken on. So I'm not trying to shut nobody down. We don't want to shut people off or cut them off. But how do we control what's being put out? And how do we control the narrative of our people, and of our music and of our culture? How do we control that? And that's
let me try and put it this way. One of the things that we were talking about with Mutulu and Pac in the streets is their development of the code for the code of thug life, right? Can we evolve a code within hip hop, right? Where we are consciously self-regulating how we're rolling this stuff out, right? And being responsible yet at the same time keeping the edge that makes hip hop so real, right? But being responsible in how we do it, so that we're not allowing the system to over glamorize the volume of violence that we're really not all about.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I believe it's possible, but it's definitely going to take work, man. It's definitely going to take work, man. And losing a brother like Pac, like we did when we did, that was pretty significant, man. You know what I mean? Because he was on that path. He was on that path of trying to create a code with some of our most troubled brothers and sisters, man. You know what I mean? In the streets, man. And yeah. So having that cut off. It's going to be some work. I still believe it's possible, but it's definitely going to be some work, man. Definitely.
So then you always telegraphing where you're going in your presentation every Friday with your gear. What you rocking today?
I'm just rocking Tane One. This is my brother Tane One's work. This is some of his artwork.
Keep that up.
Yeah. So it's just respect to the brother. Always keeping him in spirit, man. He's always in my heart and in my mind. So that's all that is, man. This is actually a drawing he did of a brother on a drum machine doing beats. You see the two speakers on the side of him, And I'm guessing that's Chain because we got the one on there, Chain One.
That is that one of the shirts that is still for sale?
Yeah. You can reach Manager MAD. Manager MAD at Gmail and put in your order. It's 3 different designs. You can get them in t-shirts. You can get them in. I believe you can get them in hoodies, and you get them in posters.
Yeah, so we got to lift that up. We got to lift that up.
Rest in peace, Tane One, and rest in peace, DJ Chaos from the Artifacts. My brothers. But like I said, I didn't really get the chance to do too much research because I've been bouncing around these gigs. But I did come across one thing that shocked me, man. I was bugging out. The public library in Brooklyn I don't know when they did this. Like I think this is why I was shocked, because I didn't know when any of this took place. But apparently they have Jay-Z's lyrics on the front of the building, like his lyrics, and they have a whole display for him on the inside as well. But on the front of the library, it's Jay-Z's lyrics. You remember what song? They got that. Yeah, they got Wild Style library cards. Public library is really trying to jump. They're trying to chime in on the 50th anniversary of hip hop. Everybody's doing that right now. Because it's the 50th year.
I got a librarian from Newark who's up in Mount Vernon now. Tamor back on to Tamor Davis, because Tamor's has been dropping seeds, particularly on the graph, because Tamor's does his share of graph work too. That's now. Who would have thought, to your earlier point, that the Brooklyn Library,
right,
one of the biggest, most highly regarded libraries in the biggest city in the country, would have the lyrics of a hip hop artist on the front of the right? Folks would have thought that a few years ago. That would have been unheard.
Yeah, I think it's What More Can I Say?
Hip hop is come.
It might be the song What More Can I Say? I'm trying to remember which song it was, but I was just wilding because they got the lyrics on the front of the building. It's amazing, man. You can go online and check it out.
We used to meet at one of my organizations. We used to meet at the Brooklyn Library.
Yeah,
Malcolm X Commemoration Committee. We used to have some of our meetings at the Brooklyn Library. We haven't been in there since COVID, but but that's coming right out of the subway, seeing some of that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's huge.
Who would have thought?
Right.
Wow.
Right. It's crazy, man. And so
on the matter of the 50th. Now, what are you seeing that you think merits a real good look, right? In terms of how the 50th is being lifted up. Some stuff is wishy-washy and commercial as hell, right? And some is good, what you just lifted up. Mama Sola, we see you. Right on, baby. You right on point. We see you.
Mm-hmm. Baby, sweet. Hold on, I was getting the names from Hovey Baby. It's like 4 songs that's on the building. That's on the front of the building.
Wow.
Hovey Baby, Sweet, Encore, Justify My Thug, and Smile. Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. Now, what were you just asking me though?
Now, in terms of, we only got a couple minutes left, right? In terms of what's standing out and how the 50th anniversary is being lifted up, what would you have folks look at?
I would say definitely look at the elders, and this is a great thing to say. I'm proud to be able to say this. Look at the elders in hip hop and what they're doing right now. Like seriously, look at our statesmen. Look at Grandmaster Caz right now. Grandmaster Caz is doing huge stuff, man. Making huge moves for hip hop, man. He's the ambassador for the culture right now. You know what I'm saying? Like he's really going all over the country, all over the world with it, and he's really breaking down the culture and just showing you everything from the elements. Now, what LL is doing is super huge to me. That whole Rock the Bells thing he's doing, he's bringing life to all of the artists that were forgotten about, that were just, pushed to the side and left behind. He's bringing life to all of these brothers and sisters and bringing them to the forefront so that they can share their stories and their knowledge and their craft. But then it's hard to say, Zaid, man, because I would say look to the elders, but also look to the seeds. But you got to know where you're looking when it comes down to the seeds. You got to know where you're looking. You know what I'm saying? We're not going to find it, especially my generation, we're still trying to work out, the shift in media and all of that. You know what I'm saying? We're trying to get away. It took me a while to start saying goodbye to radio and hello to other stuff, because radio is not what it used to be. You know what I'm saying? Television, all of the mediums, they're not what they used to be. It's new stuff going on now, and we got to know how to adjust to it and work with it. But when you can find the youth, man, that's doing it, man, it's out there, man. There's people out there. The sister mentioned No Name.
No Name, yeah. I was going there.
And I know John Austin. He's always talking about No Name. That's one of his favorites. But definitely check out No Name. But people like No Name. You know what I'm saying? No Name. Check out Sa Rock, not Sha Rock, not the sister from the beginning, but Sa Rock. The sisters. I'm actually going to see Sa Rock on August 5th with Rod Digger. Rod Digger's going to be performing as well. But check out people like that, man. Just when it comes to the new stuff, the young stuff, you got to go out there and look for it, man, because these young kids, there's a lot of, we hear about the drill stuff and all of that. And that's, like I said, that's what the mainstream is trying to push. But there's a lot of good stuff coming from these young kids out here, man. That's serious, man. And they're very honest with their perspective. You know what I'm saying? They're very honest, man. And I really respect that and I appreciate that. But it's definitely something we all got to search for. It's not just going to be put out there for you, because that's not what the corporates are. That's not what they're in the business.
They don't want us to add the good stuff. That's right.
They're not in the business for that.
That's right. They want to manage us and keep feeding us to these damn prisons and these cemeteries and selling sneakers off our behinds.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
We just food for prisons and graves to them. You know what I mean?
As we wind down, any closing thoughts? We got 2 minutes, exactly 2 minutes left. Any closing thoughts for the week? Looking forward to next week and beyond. What's coming up with you? What's your next big gig?
My next big gig. What are we looking at right now? What's today? The 14th. My next big thing, I'm going to be on Abington Avenue. That's where all of the graffiti and stuff is going on. Abington Avenue in Newark. Towards basically North Newark, on the 22nd. That's a Saturday. I'm going to be there DJing. It's going to be food. It's going to be graffiti. It's going to be performances and all that stuff. But I'm going to be spinning out there for all the heads coming out, man. It's just going to be a nice summer day. You know what I'm saying? Come out, check out some of the art, get into some of the music and the vibes. The following day after that, on the 23rd, that Sunday, I'm supposed to be at the Newark Riverfront. So this is all part of Brick City Jam's thing. Brick City Jam is putting this stuff on. So yeah, Abington on the 22nd, that Saturday, and then that Sunday, the 23rd. I'm going to be out there spinning, so definitely check me out.
Well, it's been a hell of a night. Good share as always. We ride with you, Rhino, all the way to the fullest. Just want to lift up a couple of things as we wrap up. Next week is the anniversary, the epic anniversary of the Mighty Newark Anti-Violence Coalition. Started in 2009 on July 20th. We'll be honoring Natasha Allen at the Office of Violence Prevention, the former first precinct, where torture has been transformed into healing. Right? 10 17th Avenue, 6 o'clock next Thursday. We want everybody to look forward to that. We want everybody back next week, same black time, black and strong, riding for the culture, riding for our people, riding for a better world and for the peace we seek. We'll see you next week, and you don't stop.
Peace.